You want to call it order?
Absolutely. Denise, please call roll.
Lisa Fricke.
Present.
Maureen Nichols.
Here.
Patricia Tim.
Yes.
John Witzel.
Here.
Robin Stevens.
I am here.
Rachel Wise.
Present.
Deborah Neary.
Here.
Patsy Kojan.
Here.
Commissioner Bloomstead.
Present.
All present.
Thank you, Denise. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Information regarding the Open Meetings Act is posted on the east wall of this room on the south side of the door. Live web streaming will be available through the State Board of Education website. Board members, please engage your microphones before speaking and turn them off when you are done speaking. And please turn off your cell phones. Thank you very much. Approval of the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the January 11th, 2019 State Board of Education meeting?
So moved. Second.
By Pat and Mo. Any discussion? Seeing and hearing none. Denise, please call roll.
Robin Stevens.
Yes.
Maureen Nichols.
Yes.
Patricia Tim.
Yes.
John Witzel.
Yes.
Rachel Wise.
Yes.
Deborah Neary.
Yes.
Patsy Kojan.
Yes.
Lisa Fricke.
Yes.
8 yes.
Thank you, Denise. Commissioner Bloomstead, are there any recommended changes for today's agenda?
Yes, actually, we have a couple items to remove. So item 6.4.B, which was a discussion item in committee, and the committee asked for a little bit more time to put a report together for full discussion of the board, so we'll do that. And then item 6.5.D, and then the action item associated with that, 7.2.C, are both, placed on the agenda and didn't need to be placed on the agenda, and so we're pulling those two things off. I think that was discussed in committee as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is there a motion to approve today's agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Mo and Robin, any discussion on this motion? Seeing and hearing none, Denise, please call roll.
Kojans.
Yes.
Neary.
Yes.
Wise.
Yes.
Nichols.
Yes.
Tim.
Yes.
Witzel.
Yes.
Stevens.
Yes.
Fricke.
Yes.
8 yes.
Thank you, Denise. Public comment period. We will now have public comment period. This period of public comment is available for any person who wishes to address the State Board on subjects within its authority. Please note that public comment should be on the topics related to the State Board's constitutional and statutory authority. Thanks to the members of the public who attend today. We have no request for 10-minute special appearance. We will now move into our 5-minute public period. I would like to remind you to please sign in if you've not already done so. There are sign-in cards at the back table. We have 2 public comment cards turned in, and the public will speak in the order the cards were received. Each member of the public will have 5 minutes to speak during the public comment period. I will announce the name of the second speaker and the person who is next, so they are prepared to come forward. Our first speaker is Marion Holstein, and second is Rachel Pinkerton.
Haina pi Hochangara Hingaire. Good morning. My name is, my Ho-Chunk name is Winnebago Woman. My European name is Marion Holstein, and I'm the current president of the Winnebago Public School Board today. And I'm here today on behalf of the Nebraska Indian Education Association, newly incorporated on January 18, 2019. We have many purposes to aid in the development and recommendation of curricula and methodology relative to educational programs provided to Indian students. And that yellow sheet are some of the purposes that are listed in our bylaws. A few more is by taking a cooperative approach to solving educational problems for all Indian students by encouraging Indian parents to become more involved in their child's education, to create a positive place for Native Americans in society through an awareness of the true history, contributions, and cultural differences among American Indians, and to function as a liaison for dissemination of information concerning Native American educational opportunities, scholarships, and historical information for the Indian nations represented in the membership area. Since time immemorial, the transmission of knowledge occurred for North American indigenous people. It overcame language barriers of the main Indian groups, their religious differences, and adopted lifestyles for the surrounding environment and varying social systems. The arrival of the Europeans found the education of Indians in the hands of the state or church, and less agreeable to recognizing religious differences in social systems. We asked Nebraska to join a movement sweeping the country, a movement long overdue, spearheaded by Native nations, communities, and individuals who heeded the words of our ancestors and achieved success in the white man's education systems. These movements endeavor to recognize the inaccuracy in history books, the denigration of people of color, and the blatant lack of knowledge of their contributions to these United States. I was listening to Mr. Henry Burke, who spoke at your January meeting. He mentioned the founding documents of this country, the Bill of Rights, Constitution, etc. Apparently, he too is unaware the Constitution is based on Indian governmental strategies, long in place before the arrival of the Europeans. Conestoga, an Iroquois chief, shared with Benjamin Franklin their nation's concept of federalism, separation of powers, and local control. Franklin then shared this with his colleagues, and this existing form of government was written into the Constitution. And I can refer you to the book Written Out of History by Mike Lee, Senator from Utah. But I want to make it clear there is no fault in not knowing what was not taught about the spirituality, sciences, horticulture, commerce, etc. of the people who were long here before the Europeans. Mr. Burke also quoted a series of data and statistics having to do with all of our students' proficiency in math, the sciences, and reading and English language arts. Sadly, our students account for some of the lowest proficiency rates and levels. It seems logical that increasing their proficiency would also increase state levels. We estimate there are approximately 4,200 Indian students in Nebraska, with approximately only 1,750 enrolled in schools on tribal nation lands. When we reviewed the Nebraska Student Achievement data released on December 21st, we, and by we I mean my colleagues who established the Nebraska Indian Education Association, we could no longer wait for the collaborative type of conversations we have been holding with tribal leaders.
Ma'am, I'm sorry for interrupting you, but we've hit our time limit. And
Are we at that?
yes, ma'am, we are.
Okay.
But we want to thank you for your comments and coming here and briefing us.
Okay, great.
Thank you, ma'am.
And I'll just highlight some, and thank Marion for being here, because Marion and I have had many conversations. I think Rachel has also been. So Marion, thanks for all of your leadership. And if you have the rest of written comments, we can put those in with this as well. So thank you.
I will. I'll leave copies. of
All
this.
right.
I didn't have time to rehearse.
Yeah, that's,
Sorry.
yeah, you were doing really good, I thought, so.
I know.
Thank you,
Can I fill
Marion.
out another comment card and then come back?
Just in a different name, Marion.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Ms. Pinkerton now.
Rachel Pinkerton, good morning. My friend Laura McCormick was before you not long ago talking about the 100-year anniversary of the Will Brown tragedy and the race riot in Omaha. And because of Laura's work and her work in juvenile justice, I got to tag along with her last week and had coffee with this gentleman. I want to call him a young man because he's young enough to be my son. You know how that works. But he's not a youth. He comes to the position, he was elected, Officer Anthony Connor elected president of the Omaha Police Officers Association in May of last year. And he came to that position directly from the cruiser on the streets, answering radio calls for 16 years in Omaha. So he has a very good grasp on the ground of the need for what we need to do as a community to collectively establish authority and support our parents and support children in being accountable and growing up, not getting in the school to prison pipeline. So I'm just so pleased to have met this gentleman. He's a great guy, great story, so you might want to get better acquainted with him. And on the subject of the school to prison pipeline, I think I told you about going to a meeting on December 9th at the Viking Center at North High, and I gave you this handout. That was the first time I met Leo Lewis with the Malcolm X Foundation, and I was very impressed with his leadership, the quality of the conversation that he was able to inspire, where parents were talking about strategies and sharing with one another means for addressing behavior problems that their children might exhibit at school. So that is, and thank you so much, Ms. Fricke, and I know, and Patsy was interested in a meeting where Leo spoke on this subject. And the conversation continues. The next step is a meeting, this refers, you'll see, both to the 2nd and the 9th of February at the Learning Community Center of North Omaha, 1612 North 24th. So at 1 o'clock this coming Saturday, as last Saturday, there will be people from the community coming together to talk about strategies. You may be aware Senator Megan Hunt has a bill before the legislature, LB 165, that seeks to eliminate suspensions and expulsions for preschool and kindergarten. Of course, the point is to build strategies. We don't want to undermine our teachers, obviously, or make it harder for them to have success in their classrooms. But we do need to have a serious talk about what can we do as schools and a community to address behaviors on site and help these little children to become successful. And so I'm very pleased to be part of that initiative, and I'll look forward to telling you more. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pinkerton. Thank you very much, ma'am. That concludes our public comment period. Commissioners' report and agenda overview. Consent agenda, Commissioner?
Yeah, I don't believe I have any cards removing anything from consent agenda, so I think we're good on that. Normally, obviously, we kind of have a 2-day process, so thanks. If there was anything, I guess I could look around and make sure I didn't miss one. So I think we're good on that front. All right, very good. And then also there's of course, let my computer die on me here all of a sudden. There's the report on rules in that item. I'm going to actually I'll come back to that one. I'm going to have Ryan come up and talk a little bit about today's meeting, and I'll come back and do the report on rules when I get caught up on my computer here.
So the agenda for this month's meeting and the schedule is a little different than what many are used to with yesterday's legislative work session. And so in talking with President Witzel, we wanted to take a moment to talk through the agenda before we continue to make sure everyone's on the same page about how today will go. It'll look and feel a little bit different. And so I am pulling up the quick view meeting agenda, and so we'll put that on the screen here in a moment. Didn't really give Travis a heads up to that, so thanks, Travis.
No problem.
So we've done the public comment period. This commissioner's report that you would normally see on Thursday is what follows today. I'd say this will be a unique section of the agenda as well, because there are quite a few items under the commissioner's report, including some guests who the commissioners asked to speak today, as well as some staff information. And so you'll see that through item 5. Once you get through that commissioner's report then and learn about those topics, we'll move to the standing committee reports in item 6. And so that would be what you might normally think of as happening on the work session on Thursday. And so you'll see, for example, the action items listed under those accordingly, but you won't be taking action on them at that point. They're there so that the committee chair can report out and the board can have discussion on those calendared items on the agenda. Committee chairs will be making recommendations to those action items there, but the vote won't take place there, or the motion won't take place there through 6. That gives you a little bit of time to consider what you've heard from the committee report, and then getting down to item 7 and action items. That's then where the president will seek motions on those action items. Any clarification on how that workflow will happen? Okay. I think then you'll see that it'll be from there what I'd call a normal Friday with approval of the consent agenda. You've got some items there. And then the approval of your travel. You do have quite a few motions related to travel this month to work through there, and then information items in the agenda. So again, hoping that we can see that to be on the same page. It might still be a little confusing when we get to it, but I'm confident it will make sense.
Thank you, Dr. Four.
So thanks for that overview, and I feel a little bit bad for our two new board members. We've not had yet kind of the regular routine meeting, so we'll keep you confused as long as we can. Yeah, that's sorry about that. The good news is you have company in me sometimes. So the report on rules, as I got that to come up, Rule 91 and Rule 92 that were approved at the December board meeting dealing with driver qualifications and transportation vehicles, basically, are both still at the Attorney General's office. As part of our regular routine, that report for rules is always in a written form for you, and I try to bring that to your attention. So there's that element. Really, next on the agenda is being able to go through a few special presentations that I think are important for us, and I I'll have our first one with our Learning Forward crew, and I'm not sure who's all actually presenting, so as they come up, I'll have them introduce themselves, but I do appreciate, we need partnerships across the state to build the type of capacity that's necessary for a lot of different reasons, and I had highlighted a few possibilities for them in their presentation about, especially as we look at Rule 10 and how we build systems that are gonna move us forward from a holistic state system. And so I just appreciate this presentation. So I'll turn it over to whichever first is going. So
All right. Thank you,
thanks,
Commissioner
Chad.
Bloomstead, President Wetzel, and members of the Board of Education. My name is Chad Dumas. I'm the Director of Learning at Hastings Public Schools and the Chair of the Advocacy and Policy Subcommittee of Learning Forward Nebraska. And I'm joined by Drs. Blaine McCann and Scott Bloom. You have a copy of the materials in front of you. So, and then there's also a PowerPoint that I'm wondering if could be posted up above so folks can follow along. So we have three purposes for sharing with you today. The first is to share with you a little bit about Learning Forward Nebraska. Second of all, to share with you the standards for professional learning. And third of all, to share with you some specific examples of how those standards might inform practice. And then after that, maybe there can be some conversation about how Learning Forward Nebraska can partner with you. So the first outcome, who is Learning Forward Nebraska? You can see our mission and our vision. Our vision is very similar to the Department of Ed's, and that is excellent teaching and learning every day. And Learning Forward Nebraska is an affiliate of an international organization, Learning Forward. Used to be known as the National Staff Development Council. And so you can see that what we really are about is building partnerships, working with leaders, members, and partners to be able to establish effective professional learning for adults every day. In the center of this graphic shows the strategic priorities of Learning Forward Nebraska, and the organization is organized around these two. First of all, building connections and communicating with members and others, and then secondly, building collaborative partnerships, which is why we're here today, to start conversations about how Learning Forward Nebraska and the resources that are brought to it might support the state board. As you know, we are a system, and so we have ESUs, we have school districts, we have NDE, lots of systems working together. And so what we like to do is engage with you in a conversation about how might Learning Forward provide some resources and standards to assist in the co-creation and maintenance of systems of adult learning, the adults in the classroom who are working with kids, in order to support the work of these 6 AQuESTT tenets that we see around the room, and also, as Commissioner mentioned, revisions of Rule 10. So that's a little bit about Learning Forward Nebraska. So second of all, the standards for professional learning. So there are 7 standards, and I'm always amazed that there are a lot of folks who don't realize that there are actually standards for professional learning. And these standards are based on research. They were developed in partnership with national teacher and administrator organizations, the Wallace Foundation, a whole host of profits, nonprofits, et cetera. And so these 7 standards really can inform the systems that we want to create or maintain in order to improve adult learning. You will notice that in your materials, the next page is called a quick reference guide. It's kind of a slick sheet of paper behind the PowerPoint. If you'll open that up, on the top of that middle part are the 7 standards of professional learning. It's a slick guide. Do you see it? Yeah. You've got that. Yeah. And you'll see the 7 standards listed across the top. And you'll notice a stem that follows in each of those. And that is that professional learning increases the effectiveness of the adults and results for all students. So that's like the touchstone of professional learning. We don't just do it just for the sake of, hey, we've got time to fill. But what are we using this time for? It's to increase our own effectiveness as educators and results for student learning. And so we thought we would take you through what might that look like as you think about each of these standards in relation to these 6 tenets. Sometimes people think professional learning automatically goes to educator effectiveness, and it does. But it also has a place in each of these other tenets as well, as we think about what are the adult learning needs to impact student learning in each of these tenets. So as you think about outcomes, so one of the things about these standards is not just student outcomes, but adult learning outcomes. So as we're thinking about revisions to Rule 10 and AQuESTT, what are the adult learning outcomes that we are also after? Data. Many times we think about student performance data. What are the adult learning data sources that we need to be thinking about as we are increasing our effectiveness. Resources, of course, you're thinking about that regularly, right? And working with the legislature on how do we allocate and direct resources to meet student learning needs, but then also building educator effectiveness needs in order to meet the needs of kids. Leadership, not just about the principal or about the superintendent, but about the leadership in every classroom, every day. How do we build the capacity of educators to become better leaders themselves? Communities of learning, a lot of research, you hear that a lot, PLCs, learning communities. We know that adults learn best when they're working with each other in community. So how do we structure learning community to make sure that we're meeting the needs of adults and kids? Designs of professional learning. So many times when people think about professional learning, they say, oh, we're gonna have a workshop, or we're gonna bring in this presenter, or somebody's gonna come from the outside. And there are a whole host of learning designs that we could engage in, from action research to observing each other, to reflecting on my own practice, to writing an article. These are all forms of professional learning, and we need to align those designs with those desired outcomes. And then finally, implementation. So many times we get going on all these things and we never think about what elements of adult learning theory do we need to be thinking about, because adult learning is different than kids learning. There's a lot of similarities, but it's different. And then change theory, to make sure that whatever we're going about is going to have long-lasting, sustained learning. So when you think about these 7 standards, I like the question, is it, which one is the most important, or which ones can you leave out? And there's a pink sheet that's also included as a larger version, so you can see that. It's kind of a nice tool, maybe you could even use it diagnostically. That which one might we leave out? Well, if we leave out learning communities, we might just have pockets of excellence. And you probably can think of schools or districts in the state that we have pockets of excellence. And so maybe we need to think about, how do we address learning communities? Or there's a lack of support or resistance, right? So these standards and this tool can be helpful in thinking about that. So I mentioned up front 3 purposes. First, who are we, Learning Forward Nebraska? Second, the standards of professional learning. And then third, some specific examples of how these might have been used. And so I'm going to turn over to Dr. McCann at this
Could you
point.
go back a slide?
Sorry, thank you.
Again, the AQuESTT, again, my name is Blaine McCann. I'm the superintendent at Westside Community Schools, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to share some of this with you. And really my job today is kind of to tell a story, the Westside story a little bit, but this is a story. There are plenty of stories throughout Nebraska where people are doing similar things to make sure that all of our teachers are of high quality. But if you look at AQuESTT, there's a couple systems I'll talk about today. AQuESTT, Rule 10, I think is part of that system, Learning Forward standards and how we've tried to integrate those into the work that we're doing, and then into that district piece. So again, we don't want to be a collection of parts, right? Chad showed you that system, that heating system earlier in the presentation, right? Well, those are all interdependent pieces. That system doesn't work without one another there. So we don't want to be just a collection of parts piled on the side. We want to be integrated and working well together. What we've tried to do at Westside, this is my systems wheel, that everything that we do is focused on student learning and engagement. And again, I won't go around and read that, but the other piece is what I always have called shared autonomy. We want our teachers to have autonomy, but at the same time, we share that, right? When we throw a pebble in the pool, it ripples across the lake, right? So we know that our actions impact one another. So, and if you looked at our systems, they would probably be connected to many of the things in our AQuESTT system. So there's that connection and that integration. From that systems wheel, we were able to devise our what we call our house document. You'll see our vision statement up at the upper right-hand piece. Very simply put, we have one goal, which is to maximize student achievement and engagement, which is, again, if you look at AQuESTT, you'll see some of those same outcomes embedded in that as well. We have 3 core strategies: reading across the curriculum with an emphasis on problem solving and critical thinking, personalizing learning for each of our students. So we promise to do that in our vision. We've done a great job of being able to implement that. And then finally, integrating technology into our classroom, not letting technology be the tail wagging the dog, but using that technology when it's most important. On the bottom, you'll see what we call our foundation. That came from our staff to say, if we're not, if kids aren't reading, if we don't have good PLC, if we don't have good professional learning, if we don't have social emotional wellness, we're not going to get to the other stuff that we really feel is important. So how did we engage our staff? Oh, and on the right-hand side of that, and I'm not going to go into it, are all of our outcomes that we've been tracking for the past 6 years. As soon as we implemented this, we started tracking what our outcomes would be. And we do a touch point every January around that information to make sure we're doing the right things and it's working. How do we engage our staff in that? We really came up with school design. I don't use the term school improvement anymore. I use school design. School improvement makes me feel like I got to wring everything out of the current system, and we want to give our teachers permission to redesign when appropriate. So yes, many things migrate over to what we're doing, but our teachers, I tell them all the time, you should be, I always say, you should be successful 75 to 80% of the time, partly because I think I'll keep my job at that level, but also because if you're not trying something and you're not failing, then you're really not giving it your all. Not everything we do is going to work, and fortunately I've had a lot of examples in my own work that I could share with them where it didn't quite work out, right? So we really work hard at having that shared vision, and again, you can see some of the AQuEST stuff embedded in this, understanding our context, and really at the bottom of that, seeing the possibilities. How do we look out in the future and really understand how we need to prepare our kids as we go forward, and then allowing our teachers to design that. I will say that what we've seen a great improvement of would be when we did the Gallup staff engagement probably 4 years ago, we had 37% of our staff actively engaged in our work. We just did it this January. It's 54% of our teachers are actively engaged, and our actively disengaged teachers have gone from, we went from 9 to 11% actively disengaged to 7, and now we're at 5% of our teachers are actively disengaged in the work. So we feel that this piece where our teachers' opinions count, they're allowed to be able to make some of those important decisions would be critical. One thing that we do, and now this year we've changed this, I meet quarterly with every principal along with the assistant superintendent, and we try to help, how do we go out and say, how can we support your work? So you can see on the far left, we have a lot of summative data that we collect, which would be state standardized testing scores, ACT scores, things that we're working on there. And then over on the side, because we meet throughout the year, we have formative assessments. So how many 3s and 4s are we getting? Because we know that if we have a high number of kids getting 3s and 4s on our standards-based reporting, that they're going to end up with a pretty high score on the NDE exam, whatever that may be, right? So we're constantly looking at that. This year we embedded with our leadership, and what we're doing, we are working with Learning Forward and ESU 3 to do the executive leadership program with all of our principals, and you'll see up on the top the Learning Forward standards are there. So we're beginning to embed that into the work that we're doing with our leadership so that we can have systems and transformative leadership in all of our buildings. To me, the principal's a key person in all of that, and so that's sort of our story. I think this is an example of how we did that. My big, hairy, audacious goal when I got to Westside was all of our third graders, or by the end of third grade, all of our students would be reading proficiently. We have decreased the number of students needing remediation from 27% to around 13% of our students needing interventions today. Part of that was what came out, and just very briefly, data. We benchmarked the data. We saw we had some issues on letter identification and sound fluency. And so we created this outcome. Our kindergartners last year, I think 94% left with fluency, and at a level where we feel if we continue to work with them, they'll be reading by the end of third grade. How we implemented that, I won't go into that. Learning design, some was full day, a large group. Resources, we used the Nebraska MTSS. We have a group of that. We have reading coordinators. We also use our principals. We have reading specialists. And then we have learning communities, and we talk about that. We have our MTSS team that meets regularly. Consultants are meeting. Those are our reading specialists, grade level meetings, and we also bring in our PLC, our professional learning communities, where they're also working what they're doing in those individual classrooms. I'll turn it back over to Chad
Okay.
after all that.
And then you have in your materials some specifics of the executive leadership program that Blaine just mentioned, and I'm not going to talk through those. But basically allows some opportunity to really engage in the standards of professional learning. What are they? And better understand those standards, and the outcomes are listed. So what we would close with is really a question, is what ways might Learning Forward Nebraska support the state board and NDE in increasing educator effectiveness and results for all kids in Nebraska? And we'd be happy to engage in that dialogue, a question and answer here, in committees, wherever that might lead. Thank you, Commissioner.
Well, thanks again for being here. I think the one thing I just wanted the board to know, if you start looking at all the different system pieces and there's themes that take place, the reality for us is continuing to look for the types of partnerships that are going to help us inform our policy making side of that equation and back and forth with school districts. I know I've been in Waverly where I watched what they were doing from a intentional engagement with their students in a lot of different ways. It was that day that you did empathy. I remember, I think Patsy was there, right? I got picked up by the local sheriff driving too fast in of all things, a school zone. But I did share with them the empathy message. So, but I mean, remarkable work when you think about that type of engagement. And I'd be actually a little bit remiss because part of the work that Marion, I think, that we've been talking about is actually how you really localize our curricular offerings, how you do that. And I think to Blaine's point, every school has kind of their structures and systems, and we have to have a rule that lets that creativity and lets that local curriculum and lets the excitement around learning in a given community. And so that's really important. And then really Chad and I worked together on a lot of different fronts over time, but it's really, we're at a point in time where, just like we talked about yesterday, from certification and making sure that we have the properly certified instructors and others in the classroom, and how that merges together with our Rule 10, and I know Robin brought that up. So thanks for that. I mean, I'll stop talking and say board members have comments, but I really appreciate you being here today.
Rachel.
Yeah, and I concur. Thank you very much for your presentation and for the enthusiasm that you bring forward in the work that you do in supporting kids around the state. Guess what I'd like to know is, what are your top couple of recommendations that you would have for us? I know that you're familiar with what we're doing with AQuESTT and the Rule 10 work and our strategic plan work, and I know you follow all of our other rules and all of those kinds of things. What are just a couple of your top areas that you would want us to really dive into? How can we help improve the system through, in particular, our regulatory authority? You know, our rules are what kind of frame the things that go on, and there are some really nice aspects about our rules. There are some aspects that are maybe cumbersome or challenging or outdated. What are just a few things that you would have as recommendations for us?
What's that?
Go for it.
I get to talk. Hi. So I am Scott Bloom. I'm Director of Learning, but I'm the President of Learning Forward Nebraska. So the Advocacy and Policy Committee, led by these two gentlemen, are much appreciated in the work that they've done. The one thing about why I'm even a member of Learning Forward Nebraska is that we are about growth. So we believe in the growth of everyone, both personally and professionally, and so Learning Forward allows us to do that. I think a lot of our work has revolved around context. Context does matter. However, with Learning Forward Nebraska, the 7 standards still exist, so that's highly important. But in the context that you work in also matters. So what do you do to create designs within those local contexts that are meaningful to you and to your people that you work with? And again, I like that idea that Dr. McCann shared of making sure we're looking at designs and redesigning. However, I don't want to miss that idea of growth. If we stop growing as professionals, then we're no longer, shouldn't be here. So that is the big thing for us. We have partnered with NDE in the past. We've been partners for the last 3 to 4 to 5 years on the continuous improvement workshops, doing breakout sessions. We've partnered on the data/AQuESTT spring conferences. We've had Fred Brown, Executive Director at Learning Forward, come in and be a keynote. We're going to start our own state conference next year in September with Fred Brown as well. So we believe there's already been some embedded work. However, I think it's from the leadership side that we really feel like we can benefit. However, in the local context. It's not about pushing 7 standards onto anyone. It's about understanding change theory. It's about understanding who you work with, the kids that you value, love, and respect every day, along with those adults, and how you make that move as a system together. And I think what each system needs to do is look at how can we work together and share those resources. I've collaborated actually. What led to Dr. McCann, Dr. Betts, who is a director for Dr. McCann, was in a executive leadership program that Dr. Sauer from ESU3 and I co-facilitated. And that really led to then the executive leadership program in Westside. So there's lots of partnerships. The purpose of an ESU is to support the districts. The purpose of NDE is to support the districts in moving forward. And so that is our goal. And so my recommendation is there are some things that we can do right off the top in creating partnerships. We've volunteered our time, so we've been fortunate that our superintendents have let us go and work with other districts. But really, isn't that what education in Nebraska is? Partnering, collaborating, working together. And it's not just about directors or superintendents, it's about the teachers. So that's who we value, and our organization consists of teachers, superintendents, board members from here as well. So.
And I would add 2 things to what Scott just said, in addition to echoing everything he said. I think specifically helping through the committee work of the state board, think about how might these standards support the work of the department and the board, first of all. And then the second thing I would think about is avoiding, Michael Fulham said it best, if you want to kill a good idea, mandate it. And so being aware that these are standards to support ongoing effective learning, how do we do that without killing it?
And I would only say that I'm a systems thinker through and through. And for me, from the board level, I think you have to understand that you are nesting inside. So, I'm a superintendent of 6,000 kids, but for the first time through our design process, we came out and modeled it as a district. And so then the schools, you'd see kind of similar to what we did, okay, it's like kind of like Rule 10, okay, we're going to follow that. Now we're starting to see people really look at their context, look at their data, look at their outcomes, because every school we have is a little bit different. We have from high poverty schools to very low poverty schools. And so understanding that we can nest inside of all of that, and we can still achieve the Rule 10 pieces. And I think from a board, from the top, I think what we need to understand that it's okay that we're nesting inside of that, and we're seeing the connections. And if you can help us be able to build that system so we fit inside of one another, really, my father-in-law, he was a woodworker and made us nesting tables, so I always use that kind of analogy. We all kind of slide in together. We're all supportive of one another, but sometimes we have to pull out the little table for what we're doing. So from my vantage point to you guys is help us develop that ability to nest inside of one another and nest inside of Rule 10, but not always look the same when we do that, or and how we express our outcomes or our assessments. How we do career and college readiness is going to be different in Millard than the way we're doing it, is because we're a different community.
Mr. Stevens, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you very much. I noticed we only have 3 chairs, but I thought you brought 4 guys.
Yes.
Does he want to talk? I don't want to leave you out. This is a fun thing to do, to get to talk in front of the state board. And if I'm not mistaken, you're a teacher?
I am.
What? Please, what would you have to say? Come on up.
Okay, I will come on up. Thinking about what I heard about local context, I think that's an important piece to all of this. Thinking about, because every community is going to be different. And every community faces different kinds of challenges, but all communities want what's best for kids. And it's just, how do you get there? And I think sometimes when you have this is how we have to do it, as opposed to allowing that develop, you can run into obstacles. So.
And I would say with that, the accountability pieces that you put in, that's really if you're going to allow some latitude, the accountability's got to be tight. And I think that is your job, because every child in Nebraska deserves a high quality education, right? So that is where we don't compromise, right? Is on that accountability piece. But how we get there, I've always said there's more than one way to skin the cat, right? Yeah. So how do we go about doing that?
Now, everybody else introduce themselves. I didn't catch your name.
My name's Lloyd McIntyre, and I'm a 3rd grade teacher at Lincoln Elementary.
In
Hastings, Nebraska.
Hastings.
Yep.
All right. Okay,
Ms. Nichols?
please,
Yes. I appreciate, don't go away.
Okay.
Because I'm referring to what you stated. I like what you said about every community is different, and you have to look at, what your needs are for that community. And we all know that districts face budget issues all the time. We hate hearing about money, 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 but it does take resources. But what I like, and then going back to Dr. McCann's statement, if teachers and principals and teachers and superintendents work together to realize what they need to do to get that growth going, it should be easier to look at that school board to say, we have got to find the money because we believe this is going to work for us. And so that would be my message to all of those out there after listening. We're always looking for those great ideas, but I think you have a great model put together here.
Ms. Patsy Johns?
Well, as a commissioner mentioned, I was lucky enough to go to Waverly, one of the Waverly elementary schools. And if that is any sign of what the product is coming from this, spending the afternoon there and watching the teachers so invested in collaboration and so invested in the creativity of their own students and not putting a lid on that creativity. The kids were using data and statistics and documenting their sources, something that I taught in high school to kids. And not only were they showing us that they had done their research, they were then able to communicate that to us in a very high-level manner. And then they took it a step beyond that and had projects that they created that went beyond the school into their community and then into other countries. I was so impressed, and I thought, what a memorable learning experience, multi-layered, creative experience, not just a worksheet. And that just made me thrilled that day because that's how I see learning should be. And I wanted to come back every day and say, what can I do to make it even better for you? I'll empty the trash cans for you while you're doing all of this. So it works.
Thank you.
Commissioner?
I'll just kind of wrap up again. Thank you for being here. We've got a couple more presentations that actually somewhat tie in a theme, a couple themes. Oh, I think Lisa maybe had a comment. Sorry.
Hi, I've had the pleasure of working with Chad a lot and learning from workshops, and I love what I'm hearing. I think this is awesome, and I think it would be really an educational addition to the teacher prep programs if they could hear what you just presented. It would be like a supplement to what they're already learning and carry it out as a first-year teacher working with the principal leadership and that collaboration that you're talking about. I don't know if you're doing that, but I would love to see that. So
It's a great idea. It's another system we can tap into.
go for it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks a lot, and definitely, actually, as we get into Rule 2020, I lose track off the top of my head, but yeah, certainly it does connect to how we prepare teachers in the state too, so thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I think next up on the agenda, we have Corey Epler to give an overview of our work on the Reading Improvement Act, and so I think, first of all, this key work obviously came from legislation last year, and I look forward to hearing from Corey on the update myself, so thank you.
Excellent. Well, good morning. I'm Corey Epler, Academic Officer and Administrator for the Office of Teaching, Learning, and Assessment. I'll let you.
And I'm Marissa Pazan. I'm the English Language Arts Specialist at NDE.
I wanted to have Marissa up here too, as we have been working very hard on the implementation of the requirements of the Nebraska Reading Improvement Act, and our goal today is just to provide some information relative to our progress and talk a little bit about the plans moving forward. I will mention that there are handouts that are posted in Spark, and Travis, if you can help me get this switch over, that would be great. I want to just walk through a couple of pieces relative to the work. One of the things that I think is important to mention is that initially upon the signage of the Nebraska Reading Improvement Act into statute, we continue to think about how we support implementation of the requirements, but more than anything, we're really looking at this as a really great opportunity to think about how we provide supports relative to early literacy reading, specifically targeting pre-K through 3rd grade. And so hence was born the Nebraska Reads initiative, which you can see the branding and some information about. We're not just viewing this as implementing requirements of a law, but thinking about how we provide tools, resources, and support that support high quality literacy instruction for all Nebraska students. A few specific things specifically that were in the law that we wanted to draw attention to. So the requirement was for the Nebraska Department of Education on or before March 1st to identify an approved list of assessments to be able to that districts might use in order to determine a reading deficiency in students. So last summer we issued a request for information to partners and vendors to have them submit the information to us relative to the resources that they have that would allow districts to identify students with a reading deficiency. The submissions were reviewed by a panel of educators, and we sent notice to approved assessment vendors earlier this year in January. An additional requirement that we ask approved vendors is to help us determine the threshold level for each grade of their assessment. That's part of the requirement of the law, is that the department identifies the approved reading assessments and the threshold levels associated with those assessments. That has been somewhat challenging because psychometrically, threshold levels vary across different reading assessments, and what we're trying to prevent is that one reading assessment telling a district that a student is proficient, but if they were to go into a different district using a different assessment, that assessment may say they are not proficient. You may be aware that there were no additional funds appropriated for this work, so we're not able to do some standard setting that we might typically do in an assessment situation. So we're relying upon the vendors to provide that information, and also working with our in-house psychometrician to help us ensure that there is as minimal variation across assessments as possible with this. We're very happy to report that we're going to meet and maybe even be early on the deadline, that we'll have this list of assessments and the threshold levels publicly available on or before March 1st. We've ran the list by the ESU Literacy Cadre to get their information and some specific districts too. Our fear would be that a district would be using something that we missed. I think what we're going to see is around at least 15 to 18 assessments that are most likely already being used in multiple districts across the state. Another piece of this effort is around providing evidence-based strategies for literacy instruction. And so Marissa is leading a team of educators to revise our state literacy plan. It will include information tools and resources that ultimately think about high-quality literacy instruction from pre-K through 12th grade, but also thinking about what this looks like in cooperation with, and I'm thinking about MTSS and how we include special education in these conversations. We're not creating things in silos with this effort. We're wanting to ensure that we have EL at the table and MTSS at the table. The conversations around dyslexia, all of those are really being folded into the revision of the Nebraska Literacy Plan. And again, using that as a starting point for supporting high quality literacy instruction for K-12. One of the things that I think will be helpful is that we are partnering with REL Central, the Regional Educational Lab, And they are developing an inventory of evidence-based interventions based on the Institute of Educational Sciences, or IES, practice guides. So IES at the national level develops these practice guides that highlight evidence-based strategies to support whether it's mathematics or literacy. But those documents themselves are hundreds of pages. So what they've been able to do, and there's an example that's attached in Spark, is to pull out the specific strategy and create a 2 to 3 page user guide that talks about, here's the strategy, here's the evidence behind the strategy, and here's what it might look like in the classroom, as well as any potential roadblocks. The other piece associated with that is the level of evidence that is related to that specific strategy. So does it have minimal evidence, does it have moderate evidence, or does it have strong evidence that it's a highly effective strategy for literacy? That work has really just expanded our capacity, and so we're going to have around 35 strategy guides that will be included, specifically targeting reading, writing, early literacy. That will be available again, hopefully by the end of this month. We also asked them to do the same for mathematics, and thinking about the state board's goal that there are evidence-based strategies for reading and mathematics in 100% of our districts, and we're excited to be able to have that as well. In the law, there's the mention of individualized reading plans. So again, Marissa is leading a team internally to provide guidance and support on what an individualized reading plan should look like. I think as that work continues to unfold, it's really a template and a guide, but also thinking about the role of MTSS and thinking about the role of core instruction and how all of those pieces support that as well. A major part of this work is communication. Not only how are we communicating internally, but how are we communicating with districts, and how can we provide support for districts to communicate with parents, because that is a requirement. We developed a Nebraska Reads brochure and FAQ. It's attached. I also have hard copies for each board member. The FAQ is designed to really talk a little bit about not only the requirements of the Nebraska Reading Improvement Act, but why grade 3? What does the research tell us around why is reading by 3rd grade so critical for student success? The brochure, again, is just a short document that districts can utilize and share with parents, share with teachers. You might not be surprised that we're fielding a ton of questions around these requirements, so our hope is that this provides some information. We're really excited about some communication support that we're receiving from Excel and Ed. It's a national organization that has worked with other states in implementing reading requirements. So they're really developing some awesome communication supports and strategies for us. They're going to have an animated video. They're developing social media playbook that we can share with districts and schools, printed materials for policymakers, for parents, thinking about the video and the materials also in English and Spanish, so including both languages in there, and even thinking about different op-eds or blog posts that we might use around the importance of reading. So excitingly, through a grant that's been free to us, and we're just really excited to get those resources out as well. The last piece that's on there, and Commissioner, you might talk a little bit more about this, is we currently have posted for a reading specialist that we are hiring. We've asked for particular emphasis on reading and early literacy, specifically pre-K3. It's open right now, so if you're watching, anyone out there, and you want to apply, we are just beyond excited about the fact to have a reading specialist, because we're not formally trained in that. You're kind of looking at the reading specialist right now as we think about this, but really having dedicated attention for reading, and that will be a position that will be jointly funded through teaching, learning, and assessment, early childhood, as well as special education. So not just specifically thinking about the requirements of this law, but how does that position provide broad support agency-wide around early literacy? Because we know that's not something that just rests in teaching, learning, and assessment. That's something that we have to be thinking about across the agency. So Commissioner, I might let you talk a little bit about how we're able to do that.
First of all, just briefly, if you remember last year, the inclusion in the Reading Improvement Act included actually identifying the reading specialists that did not exist at the Department of Education. There was not funding provided by the legislature necessarily in that. I think the A bill that kind of went with that was negative $25,000. That's not the salary we're proposing, because I don't think we'd find anyone. We thought it was enough of a significant push. We did include that, by the way. We included a request for funding from the legislature in our current appropriations process. We don't know if that will be able to happen. We really tried to take a hard look on the inside of the agency on how can we pull some resources together to make sure that we have this support going and to demonstrate how dedicated we are to make that work. There's other things that fall by the wayside anytime you're trying to shift positions around, but we felt like this was critical work at this moment in time, well aligned with the board's strategic plan, also obviously well aligned with the expectations around the law. So we've done that, and then, again, that probably means Corey gets more jobs somehow in the reality, but I think it's been very, very good work, and thanks, Marissa, for everything that you've been doing, because a lot of this has fallen on her shoulders for this particular effort. So it's impressive what you've done. Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Frickney.
Thank you for all that you and the staff have done, the brochures, everything. There was one document, I don't see it now, where you explained about what's coming up with the teacher prep program, and I appreciated that. I appreciate these documents, the FAQ. There's just so much out there in the partnerships that you're working with, and how hard the staff has been working behind the scenes, because this was like a unfunded mandate, and we just have to do what we have to do to help kids. So thank you for all of the documentation and resources to help us know where we are in this process.
Any other comments, concern? If not, I would like to thank you, Corey, for the frequently asked questions section. I thought that applied to everybody, from, if you will, seasoned professionals to parents and school board members all around. So thank you very much. Well done.
If I can add, those are posted on the ELA webpage, and we'll continue to share those out. And as we have information, we will have a separate Nebraska Reads website where everything will be housed. So if you're looking for information around early literacy and support for reading, that's where we're going to direct folks to. So thanks for the opportunity to chat this morning.
Thank you, Dr. Epler.
Just real quick that you brought that up, do you have a time frame? I'm sorry, you brought it up now about when that website will be.
It will be a transition, so depending upon the capacity of our own staff to build it. So we would like to have it by March 1st, but I think that the reality is we may post some of those initial things on the ELA website, or excuse me, webpage, and then as the other webpage gets finalized, going from there. And I do have hard copies of this for folks too.
Thank you, Dr. Epler.
Thank you.
So we'll transition. So OER is up next,
Yep.
and Dorian is there. I was looking this way, didn't see
I'm
Dorian.
gonna let her
so,
drive,
all right.
though.
So we'll do a quick update on OER work as well, which, well, a lot of these things tie together in a lot of different ways. So.
Well, as Dorian is pulling up the PowerPoint, based on some of the conversations around digital teaching and learning resources, we thought it might be a great opportunity to highlight another awesome resource that's getting ready to come out here. Well, it already exists. It's just a matter of sharing it. So I'll let Dorian take the lead on this.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for having me today. I'm excited to update you a little bit on the progress of our Future Ready plan, which does include this OER Commons repository. It also is an update on the strategic board plan, goal 4.1, which is to create a statewide digital course and content repository. We began work on this with the ESUCC. It's a joint project that we started last year in building the website. We officially launched it this month. So it is now visible for the whole world to see on the OER Commons main site. So you'll see a Nebraska hub along with many other states' hubs. It does have the access of free accounts, so anyone can join and begin to add resources with that free account. Content that can be found in our OER repository, things as small as a single photograph to entire year-long courses, can be placed up into the OER repository for holding and using and sharing with others, as well as everything in between. So this is just a list of some other items that you would find within our repository. This is what the OER Common Hub looks like. This is provided by ISKME and is maintained by ISKME, and all members who join with their free account can explore, can search, they can build with the open author software that is provided within it, which is a nice simple way to start adding and digitizing all of those things that educators already have, and also to create new things. Special features of our OER Commons Hub, which is housed inside the main hub, is that you don't have to join Nebraska specifically, but you can still search and look through all of our content repository pieces. Everybody can contribute to those items, even if you're not part of a statewide hub. Everything is searchable, even down by standard, if you would like to search by state standard. You can create your own professional learning community groups within here, and there's the ability to share conversations, to share content, to collaborate on that content within there, which is wonderful for professional learning communities. The authoring software is built in. There are several ways that you can put your content in, choosing one that you're most comfortable with and that best meets your needs for the type of content that you're adding. It is learning management system and learning tools interoperability enabled, which is a lot of long words, but basically it just means that if a teacher puts something up in the repository, they can also export it out and share it within their learning management system like Canvas or Schoology or Google Classroom, which is nice because you can also share with students that way. This is what our hub looks like. So this is the design of the hub as you'll find it. I did want to pop out real quick and just show you the picture. You have this presentation. The picture's linked, but I also put the link at the bottom. There are just three kind of really main things that I want to point out when you go here, because this is kind of a long page, besides the beautiful picture and the wonderfully created logo that Katie Bieber did for us. But if you go in, there are links to Nebraska OER information and some basic training, so you can begin that without having to attend our official training. You can see that we have groups for both state organizations and K-12 content areas, and all of our members can create their own groups if they like. But the main thing is the collections. So these square boxes are what we call collections, and these collections can be built in a lot of different ways. Our Nebraska instructional materials collections are being built by Nebraska teachers and educators across the state as we provide training and time to them. So this last year we have been working with a few areas, fine arts, physical education, and social studies, testing to make sure that the standards are being aligned properly, that all of the technical things work and things go where they're supposed to go. And that we have been very successful. Our largest group right now is the physical education teachers, which was the first group that we began our work with. They were generous in giving lots of time to us. The second section that you'll find there is some popular collections that are done by professional companies like CK12, Khan Academy, Engage New York. So some that have been, again, vetted and looked at for high quality content, good alignment to Nebraska standards and course content. And so you can see we've already placed those there, and they're searchable. There's thousands of items you can see in there, and teachers can, again, still search by content or state standard and find those things.
Can I add one piece to the that particular section? Because as you look at like Engage New York as an example, that's a fully scoped and sequenced curriculum that's open. So as we think about high quality instructional materials, as we think about equity and we think about access, that's a really great example of a very high quality set of materials that's open. And that, of course, there needs to be professional learning attached to implementation portion of that. But what we've tried to do is pull over some of those open, fully scoped and sequenced curricula into OER. And as we build out our additional work around instructional materials, ensuring that districts know that those opportunities exist there too.
And then the last main section on this front page is where all of our Nebraska working groups are, and we have them divided into state organizations and then our K-12 content areas as we begin to work with different content. So that's kind of what it looks like. You're welcome to explore. If you have any questions, let me know, or reach out to me. I'm happy to help assist in any way I can. The other things that we have within the hub that I didn't already mention are that the single sign-on has been enabled. ESU has partnered with us to help create a link within school district's single sign-on instance to make it easier for staff and students to just use the same login and password. It also then gives them automatic membership to our Nebraska hub when they go through our cloud instance. And it is a continuing project, and so I'm going to tell you about a little bit of work that we have coming up. So we've been working for the last year with several groups, and coming up we do have a presentation at NETA here in a few weeks where we'll share some more. I'm building an OER toolkit. It should be released in early April, and that will provide almost everything you would need to know about OER. For districts to use for training with staff, for an individual to train themselves. It will have things like copyright for education, Fair Use Act, how to make things accessible, so some ADA compliance with digital resources. So a lot of helpful things that we're providing also face-to-face, but kind of puts that information out there so people can start on their own if they're ready to go and excited to start using the repository. We are having a Future Ready Summit in June, and this will also be trained at that summit in early June, 10th and 11th, here in Lincoln. And then we already have on the books for this summer training for family and consumer science teachers, the business, marketing, and information technology teachers, again with physical education teachers and our science teachers. They'll be working with the new standards and also adding. We did do some early training for the first 3 groups, and we will also do that with the science teachers before summer so that they have some kind of pre-information so that they can spend most of their time actually creating content and materials and having conversations around what we'd like to see in our Nebraska collections around those areas. And then, of course, Administrator Days. In late July, early August, we'll also be sharing with administrators the tools and encouraging them to share out with their buildings as well.
And the thing that I think, too, I just continue to emphasize is the importance of quality of the items in the OER repository. And so what we're able to do is not only align it to standards, because that's a pretty weak action, you just align something to a standard, but as they're creating the resources or curating it, our educators are actually able to help us determine the quality of it. So they actually accept an item, and then there will be a little logo icon that says it's an NDE approved or ESUCC approved item. So that means that we've ensured that it's aligned to standards and that it meets our expectations for quality, because what OER is not is Pinterest 2.0. It really allows us to put some parameters around our expectations of quality of the items, not just the alignment, because again, anything we can align, but really putting some parameters around quality of the items. That's the critical piece of this, and it really allows us to put some of those gates around it.
Vice President Nichols.
First off, Dorian, this is superb. Corey, this is kind of blows me away. I noticed we don't have the PowerPoint in Spark here. Is that possible to get? I would love to be able to go in there and start having some fun.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I think it was posted up a little bit higher under the commissioner's report. So there was a PDF right at the top. So
okay.
But, yeah,
Dr.
but I can
Wise.
send you the presentation too.
Dr. Wise.
Yeah, and I agree. It's great in what you're doing around the OER space and how you bring those pieces together. So I guess my question is, there's a lot of digital resources that are not OER, that schools access or that are statewide. How are you merging digital resources that are license-based resources that also play an important role in this space, as well as we just had the presentation on professional learning. So how are you envisioning all those elements to come together so they're not a disjointed, here's our OER, here's Nebraska Career Connections, here's, you know, this piece. Do you see how you can bring, and can you put any licensed items in the OER, or that has to be all
Right.
OER?
So OER, our OER repository does have to have open content, open education resources, and we monitor that as well as ISKME monitors that as well. We do have a plan to enhance this with another product that we would be able to put the licensed materials, all of them, and that would be accessible through your login and password, so those districts that have licenses would access things that other districts might not if they didn't have the licensing privilege for that. So that's another project that's coming soon, hopefully.
And we also even see that with some of the resources that are open. They require a login. And so that's part of the conversation too, and the value of partnering with an organization like ISKME, a national group, to help us figure some of those out, because we don't want teachers to have to log in 16 times to get to one particular resource.
Or if need be, they can go to one site.
Yes.
And if they have to differentiate within that site to OER versus, but just take me to one site and I can start to navigate where I need to go.
Ms.
Great.
Fricke?
Perfect. Thank you.
Wow. That's all I can say about that. But I am so excited about this. I was just wondering, will public libraries and homeschool parents, teachers have access to this?
Absolutely, absolutely. They can join today, they can access it today, and if they'd like to create a group and be a member of our hub, that's the easiest way to become a member of specifically the Nebraska hub, is to create a group, and we would be happy to do that for them.
I think
Ms.
that's wonderful.
Coe-Johns.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, this is a huge step for equity in our state. And so I want to thank you for that, because that means quality of materials don't just reflect how much money a district might have or anything like that. So I'm thrilled to see this come about. I've been waiting, anxiously awaiting, knowing that you are working on it. My next question, though, is so you're rolling it out in science and several topics. What is your plan for the other subject areas like writing or theater or whatever?
Part of it, what we're really wanting to make sure is timing. So you think about social studies, for example. It didn't make sense for us to put up a bunch of social studies stuff knowing that standards are in the process of being revised. So there's the timing piece of it. There's also just the sheer capacity and resources that are able to. So Dorianne is our director of digital learning, so she's the one that's coordinating that with our other content specialist. So part of it is resources available and time of the content specialist to be able to help us get teachers there, and just the actual amount of time it takes to do the training. We started with PE last summer as kind of a test group, simply because they had revised standards and they're so anxious to have supports for instruction. And I think they discovered it takes a lot longer to really start to put things up there. It isn't just, here's a really cool lesson plan I'm going to put up there. It's, let's dig into the quality of it. Let's look at the alignment to standards. And they kicked out a lot more than they put in.
Yeah, they absolutely did. They were very robust in the work that they did, but we really want to tie it to the content specialists and making sure that we bring the right people together so that we do have high quality. So we have a plan in place to work with each of them as their schedules
And if I can add on the equity piece, so not just equity for our students or teachers, but thinking about equity for content area. And I'll use family and consumer science as an example, where our content specialist says, there are a ton of ELA and math and science resources out there, but our family consumer science teachers seem to struggle to find high quality. So as we talk about equity, that's an important consideration too, not just making sure we have all math and ELA, but ensuring there's resources for all content areas relative to supports for instruction.
Thank you so much for your work, for all of those reasons.
Thank you.
So yes, thank you very much, and excuse me, we'll go ahead and keep doing this. What I'm excited about with this is we're getting all those foundational pieces in place so we can keep building our system capacity, and so just thanks again, both Dorian and Corey, for that effort.
Indeed.
Dean's not here.
Yes.
Dean's not. We don't give Dean any credit if he's not here.
We just give him work. We'll just give him work.
Excellent. So thank you very much. Next, and then I think President Winslow asked after the next presentation, we'd probably do a little break. So, but next we're going to talk about some special ed. Are you guys coming up for that? So Amy and Greg, and I don't know if anyone else. This is actually a bit of a follow-up to talk a little bit more on MTSS and MOE. Yesterday we had that chance to talk a little bit about how much money is invested from the federal level and through IDEA and otherwise, but I'll turn it over to Amy and Greg to kind of give us an update on those two fronts. So.
Okay, so we don't have a formal presentation. We were told that you might have some questions, so we thought we'd answer questions if you have them. I did want to give you just a little bit of peek into, I think sometimes there's the question, why is MTSS coming from special education? So it's coming from the Office of Special Education, but we're really working with all educators and all students. In 2012, the Office of Special Education Programs, which is the federal hand that tells us what to do, came out with results-driven accountability. And what that really made us look at is what we were doing for all students to achieve the goals and outcomes that we wanted to for the specific special education data purposes that we needed. And one of the things that we were required or asked to do, and we graciously answered, was develop a state systemic improvement plan. And within that plan, we looked at reading, which is very timely, as Nebraska legislators decided to look at that as well, and how we were improving. And back in 2012, the language we used is closing the gap around special education students and general education students. As we've moved forward, we've found that closing the gap isn't the attainable component that we wanted to look at. We really wanted to look at equity across all students and how are we making growth comparable to special education students and general education students. And the thing that became glaringly obvious to us is we needed to do work in general education because special education students are general education students first. So was born MTSS from RTI, if you remember the RTI world, response to intervention. Response to intervention really, really focused on what we were doing to provide for special education students. Response to intervention still exists. We still provide intervention to special education students. Most of the time, it's once they're already in special education. But as we all know, sometimes when you get to special education, it doesn't necessarily lead to outcomes that might not get you out of special education. So that's where MTSS really comes into play. What are we doing to build systems in schools to help enhance what's happening for all students? So potentially we're providing interventions and supports prior to special education or prior to reading deficiencies or prior to all of those pieces so that all students, the equity component, are receiving what they deserve prior to adding a label or adding a what we in our world call a life sentence, but hopefully not a life sentence, but giving students what they need. So with that, we gathered a whole bunch of stakeholders, and initially around 100 stakeholders where we've developed the MTSS support network. In 2009, we actually began with the RTI process, working with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. We've continued those supports, and we have 67 stakeholders that now serve on a builders group. They're throughout the entire state that really have helped us to develop a framework. So we have supports that now align to 6 essential elements that are very key to the learning forward elements as well. And we are training and providing coaching and systemic support to school districts across the state. I would tell you that we're providing supports to every single school district across the state, because every single school district does special education, and we try to fit this in there every time we can. But to date, we have 92 districts that have attended 4 key components to the awareness around MTSS, and we're doing that through an ESU model where we go out and provide 4-day trainings to ESUs. And then we are also, in addition to that, supporting school districts like Westside. Dr. McCann's already left, but providing them with more intensive support. They started this program or this support several years ago, so they're not one of those who need that initial awareness, but we have about 72 districts that we're providing those more intensive supports around whatever they developed their needs are. One that they have found is that principal and leadership component. We've also, through the UNL consortium, we've developed those K-3 supports in specific reading interventions, and we're just trying to work with anyone and everyone to make sure that we are providing for students what they need. With that, I think some school districts have come up with some questions around those MTSS supports and what that means for special education. So in addition, we're also trying to provide those supports as well.
Yeah, I think one of the key questions that we talked about before is kind of the relationship between MTSS and maintenance of effort, meaning that schools have to spend a certain amount of money, similar. Greg can probably give you the exact details, but the reality is that relationship. Otherwise, there's this penalty. And I think we were asked questions, hey, look, is there a connection by implementing MTSS, perhaps reducing the need for special ed services because of the early intervention types of approaches, and whether or not that has an impact on MOE. So I don't know if either of you would be willing to kind of address that general question. I'm hoping
so basically, IDA maintenance of effort for school districts is they have to spend the same amount of local funds towards special ed, or a combination of local and state funds for special ed services. And or the per capita of each one of those. So when the per capita comes in there, when the questions with MTSS, where you're providing less services, but less services to the number of students, so the number of students in special ed should decrease, and one of the allowable exceptions for school district local maintenance of effort is a decrease in the student numbers. So in theory, if this is at very simple terms, that if you had 4 special ed students last year and you had 3 this year, and you were providing less special ed services, those costs for MTSS, that the exception makes the level of effort that they had the year before. In this case, they have 3 compared to 4 students, it would be 75% of what it was before. Now, that's pretty straightforward, but there's going to be other circumstances, because not every student gets the same dollar amount of services from one year to another, and the different students change from year to year, but the decrease in the number of students being served in special ed is an exception to maintenance of effort.
So one thing I'd highlight just when I was in DC, so one of the key asks, and I've been on this one for 15 years, I think, around maintenance of effort, is that I believe that we should be advocating at a federal level for some changes in how maintenance of effort is calculated. In particular, there seems to be a disincentive to try to get more efficient with that, and then when schools do get more efficient and it's not part of the current exceptions, they are penalized, or the state is penalized, or both in certain cases, depending on how that works. So what I had asked, in fact in meetings specifically with Senator Fisher, was that at least that she would be, I've asked her this a couple different times, at least that she would help advocate as we get to IDEA for a more of a what I'll call a maintenance of effort reserve, where school districts are able to set funds aside to spend them more appropriately on particular needs as we go. And so it's something that we want to continue to work on. It's not completely in our state policy control, right? That's an element of how that works at a federal level. I also think there's some policy issues that we can begin talking about of how maintenance of effort is actually used and how we use special ed funds at a state level to be able to do that. So I just highlight that, not to try to dive into those details, but I want you to know that the concerns that we've heard from school districts, and as we try to implement this from MTSS, we're trying to be really cognizant of how to approach that. And it's certainly a touchy issue when we're writing letters to school districts saying send some money back our way because we had a maintenance of effort issue, right? It's not a position we want to be in. I know Greg loves to be in that position, but it's a challenge, because when you think, hey, look, we're doing the right things, and you're getting caught in those scenarios. So we're at least cognizant of how that can be and trying to follow and ensure that we're following the law, but at the same point in time, I think we need to be also advocating for some changes on that front. I think there could be some momentum around IDEA, and hence the reason to start putting that story together to advocate on that front.
And one of the things that we're really focused on doing is providing that individual support to those districts for a better understanding of use of funds, better understanding of how those funds impact their maintenance of effort. So we're doing a lot of individualized training and conversation, reaching out to districts as we see trends that might be happening, utilizing our MTSS data to inform how we should be discussing these things with districts.
Thank you so much, and I think as a list is generated of what's our priorities for IDEA, since you segued into that a little bit, Commissioner, I do think it's important that we take the opportunity, if there is momentum, which it does sound like there might be, then again, who knows, but it sounds like there might be momentum for IDEA, really trying to tell the Nebraska story of what do we want to see in IDEA. So as we look at reauthorization of our regulatory authority based on what the federal expectation is, that we've really tried to advocate for all the elements, not just the MOE, though that's important. What are some of the other key elements that we should put forward as a part of our advocacy? And we do have a legislative conference coming up, a national legislative conference coming up, that it would be great if we had something that tells the Nebraska priorities prior to that conference. That would be great, and
Absolutely.
Having that input from you and from constituents across the state would be super.
Do that.
So thank you very much for taking some time with us today.
Mr. Stevens, did you have anything?
Sorry, I just want to reemphasize and I'm glad that I heard your explanation there about MOE and the frustration that superintendents really feel with that, and you're just the messenger, right? And so I appreciate that too. Okay, just another, really, tell me, is there something that I should tell superintendents other than, hey, this is the way it is? What's something I should say when it comes to MOE and the efficiency issue, but I have a second part too, so.
Well,
Go ahead.
I would tell you to tell them to call us, because I think so many times it's scary because they aren't necessarily sure, but we're working with them daily. So if they are in a position where they're frustrated or maybe even questioning things, call. Let us help. Let us come in. Let us dive around and explore other options, because I think that
it's this federal thing that seems scary, like, yes, you just have to do it. It is the way that it is. But there are things that we can think about and we can talk about and we could maybe explore differently.
So we have tools out there, some worksheets that we've developed that schools, superintendent, with business people can use to track their expenditures and project where they think they're going to be for maintenance of effort issues and stuff. And I'm always open for if we can discuss what that tool's telling them and potential strategies related to what their numbers say.
And just one more thought here, and I know this is a legislative thing, but this percent of reimbursement, how does, can there be any explanation here as to how this funding mechanism all works? The maintenance of effort, the percent of reimbursement, that sort of thing. And I look to you, but I see you kind of glancing over this way, so I don't know.
Well, I'm
But
glancing because we don't really, I don't know that you want us to explain it right now. Maybe we could take a full day to try and outline that for you, but we would love to, yes.
Can you give me Cliff Notes? I got through English class, Patsy, with Cliff Notes, sorry. I don't know. If there's a Cliff Notes version, that'd be great. If not, we can move on.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if we've had, kind of a basic summary piece. That might be something we work on, just because I think it would help you. It'd actually probably help me, and yeah, to do that. So I think it sounds easy at first, and it gets tougher as you go. So
I think actually Robin brings up a really good idea. Maybe President Witzel, if you can find some time, carving some time in for really a presentation on IDEA, Rule 51, kind of the broad, not just the financial aspect, but to have a good understanding of where we are now, to try to advocate for where we need to be with reauthorization, might be helpful for all of us.
So we could be better champions.
Yes, absolutely.
well, and I appreciate that, because I think one of it's a huge area. It has a huge impact on students across the state. We've made a lot of changes. I mean, I'm just going to tell you that across how special education works in the department itself has changed, and so we're kind of keeping up with that, plus informing superintendents and others across the state how that works. So I know that's actually probably be helpful for us to have that type of engagement with you.
And with that, the board will take a 10-minute break. Let's be back here by 1:45. Executive session. We'll continue on with standing committee reports. Patricia Tim, please report on the policy committee meeting.
Yes. The policy committee had no action items. We had 2 discussion items. We had a quick review of board policies that are what we do. We kind of talked about our scope of work. We had our board policies are divided into 3 categories. We have internal policy directives, which is our way of putting things out there that for direction to the board itself and how we direct NDE to conduct and operate its business. We have bylaws. Those are the internal rules for us, and we have position statements. And the board statement, these are board statements to let the public and educators know where the board stands on a topic, concern, or area. But they're not necessarily, or they are not a directive. They're just something that we support. The second discussion item was bylaw B1, which describes the duties of the board president and vice president, and we don't anticipate any revisions to that. So this will be reinstated as is. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pat Tim. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. We're moving on. Vice President Nichols, please report on the legislative committee meeting.
Yes. For those that might be tuned in today and weren't yesterday, we spent the entire afternoon, 3 hours of very in-depth, good conversation, professionally, respectfully done, on quite a few bills. We had a list of bills that the committee recommended support for. We pulled out some that there were further discussion on, and we voted, and everything was voted in support of. There were bills that we were proposed opposition to, voted on, discussed, voted upon, and we also had a list of bills that we just needed to discuss and get the full board's feelings on where they were with them, and some were put into the support, some opposition, and some just remain and will monitor. Perhaps things come up in between now and the next board meeting. We may be giving advice to change our current stand. But for now, I believe we've done a great job. I look forward to the continued weekly conversations, phone conference conversations with the committee of Robin, Lisa, and Patsy. And but I want to thank all of you again yesterday for the in-depth conversation of what we did. It was a long afternoon, but a well-spent afternoon. And I again want to thank Brian and all of his peeps, along with for all of their preparation in getting us to yesterday. You just did an outstanding job. Board members are very complimentary of everything. And to Nikki, who I know quickly put together everything for us in like 15 minutes time yesterday after our committee met to be able to do our work. So thank you to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Nichols. We'll proceed on. Lisa Fricke, please report on the AQuESTT Teaching and Learning Domain Committee meeting, please.
All right, well, thank you, President Witzel. First of all, I want to thank the committee members and the staff members. It was my first time as chair, and they guided me along, and we made it through it. There are no action items. We had an update on world language, and Jeremy gave a little update on assessment, and Katie Graham and Don Lindsay are here to provide information on the recently reauthorized Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act. That's a mouthful. And welcome, Katie and Don.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. As Lisa mentioned, I'm Katie Graham. I'm the Director of Career and Technical Education for the department.
I'm Dawn Lindsley. I'm the Assistant Director. And you are absolutely right. It is a very long title. So nationally, we've all agreed, if we could flip it over to PowerPoint, to just call it Perkins 5.
Oh,
And that's just going to be a lot easier. So with the reauthorization, we're just going to go up a number. So after presenting to the committee yesterday, they asked if we would just shorten it up a bit and provide an update as to where we are currently in current technical education in Nebraska, and with the reauthorization, what the new law provides in terms of opportunities and some decisions that we're going to have to make related to CTE moving forward. But before we get started, I did want to recognize that February is CTE month. And it's a time for us to recognize all the accomplishments and everything we're doing and our students are accomplishing as we prepare them for the next stages in their life, which includes post-secondary education, of course, leading to their career of choice. To help set the context, and especially for some of our newer board members, we are really proud of what we're able to do here in Nebraska. In terms of scope, these are statistics that have been true for the past number of years. 71% of Nebraska students, grades 7 through 12, participate in CTE. And what it means to participate is that year they took at least one CTE class. Last year that represented about 98,606 students. So we're touching a lot of Nebraska students. If students take 3 or more CTE courses in a very narrow area, we call them a concentrator. And to put it in perspective, 99% of concentrators in Nebraska graduate high school. So we know we're really, we're onto something here with CTE. Another way of looking at that is we have a very, very low dropout rate when students really focus and take numerous courses in CTE in a specific area. All of our high schools offer CTE courses, which is pretty great. On average, when a student graduates from high school in Nebraska, they've completed about 5.5 CTE classes. So we're really talking about all kids here. And one of the things we love most about CTE is our career and technical student organizations, which gives students the opportunity to apply the things they're learning in the classroom and compete on a statewide level, on a national level, and really be recognized. So Wednesday, the governor signed a proclamation recognizing CTE month here in Nebraska. So we're really excited to move forward. So just to give an overview of how we got here, and this is there's a lot of intentionality here. In 2012, Perkins 4, the law around career technical education in the nation, officially ended, and we've been waiting for reauthorization ever since. So we've been in limbo for quite some time. In 2014, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act was signed into law, which brings together in strategic coordination all of the core programs that have a federal investment in skill development. So that could include employment and training services, it could include adult education, career and technical education, vocational rehabilitation, a number of different groups all coming together to really focus on that workforce priorities. The next year, ESSA was signed into law, so that impacted us a bunch. So in fairness, the lawmakers were pretty busy passing some really high-level legislation. The following year, the House did propose new legislation related to CTE, but it never really moved forward. The following year, they proposed it again, and this time we saw bipartisanship support, which is pretty typical for career and technical education, and Perkins 5 was signed into law in 2018. So that's where we are now. The law will cover a span of 5 years, the first year starting July 1 of 2019, so just in a few months, and that begins a transition year, which the federal government gives us to, we delay the implementation of a lot of the conditions of the law to give us time to figure out how we're going to implement them and really make some key decisions about what's important for our vision related to CTE moving forward. At the end of that year, we will submit a 4-year state plan based on all the input we got, and that will last from 2020 through 2024. And at that time, unlike Perkins 4, we will submit another 4-year state plan. So we won't be in limbo like we were this past number of years. Perkins 5 really does build on Perkins 4 a lot. If anything, these are some of the highlights of what it has, the focus has changed. Definitely increasing access, really focusing and doubling down on high quality and equity. Programs of study is the delivery model, which we'll talk about in just a little bit for career and technical education. And again, that timeline comes into play. One of the things I find most valuable in some of the decisions related to Perkins 5 is that they directly align with definitions in ESSA and definitions in WIOA. So all of these federal partners are talking the same language and beginning to really see it as, we've talked a lot about systems today, another bigger system of which this is a part. In Nebraska, as I mentioned, we are really proud of what we've got going. We are recognized nationally often. We've got publications coming out all the time about our great programs around the state. Our model really focuses around these 4 areas. As I mentioned, high quality programs of study. A program of study is a sequence of courses. I think that's here. This is an example of a program of study. So it's a non-duplicative sequence of courses that progress in specificity and rigor. So students have the opportunity to explore an area, take more of an introductory course. Then there's different options for an intermediate course, really kind of narrowing that focus of what they're interested in. And then it results in a capstone experience course, which is typically and very often offered for dual credit. There are workplace experiences embedded to these capstone courses, again, because the students by that point have a really good idea of maybe what they're interested in, what their skills are, and where they'd like to continue and pursue their education. So we have our programs of study. We have our career development, which is emphasized throughout career awareness and exploration and planning activities. We promote expanded learning opportunities, as I mentioned, which could include internships and job shadows, fostering these really important key relationships between business, industry, and the classroom, finding ways for businesses to be more involved in the school and students to be more involved and really experience the worlds of work before they make key decisions about their post-secondary education. This is how we structure career and technical education and deliver those programs of study in Nebraska. It's structured around the Career Clusters model, which is a national framework for organizing occupations and jobs related to career fields. Those 6 colors represent the 6 career fields, and then in more specificity, that's broken into the various career clusters that make up that field. So our programs of study, all of those different sequences of courses, are really based at that cluster level, that really specific narrow focus, like software development. So students are able to start broad and then narrow down. We serve as the eligible agency currently to receive and administer the funds of Perkins, which amount to about $6.8 million annually from the federal government. 85% through a formula flows straight through to our secondary and post-secondary CTE recipients. All 6 community colleges, including NCTA, are recipients of Perkins. So we are set up to make sure systems are aligned in relation to secondary and post-secondary. So I'm excited to see the opportunities as we move forward. As you can see, we're able to reserve some of those funds for statewide innovation and other state leadership opportunities, and of course for administration. You'll notice that from that 85%, we do have a split currently between secondary and post-secondary. That is a decision we will need to make and write into our state plan after the next year of analyses and really getting input and feedback from those most impacted to determine what is the basis and rationale for the most effective split of funds between secondary and post-secondary. So now, where is Perkins 5 taking us? There are 3 major tenets. The first one, of course, is program improvement, focusing again on the high quality and the commitments to program of study. The new law introduces a local needs assessment that our recipients will have to complete every other year. And the restriction on funds is now formed in a way that Perkins funds can only be utilized on outcomes identified from that local needs assessment. So when we're talking about data and systems and quality and alignment, it's just another way to ensure that the federal investment is really going towards those local needs identified from those locals. So we're working on a lot of ways to support that assessment as we think about the best way to do that around the state. That set aside, that reserve that was 10% that we can use for local innovation has been increased. We're now able to hold up to 15%. So that will be a decision that we have to make in terms of what our big vision is for statewide efforts. Aligning our work to labor market information is something we do. We probably do it better than most in the nation. A lot of folks are trying to steal our revision program, which we're so happy to help them think through for their own states. And it's based on alignment to labor market information. So we're set up for that as well. So much stronger focus on equity in Perkins. If you're familiar with the history of vocational education, we haven't always been the best in terms of making sure these opportunities are for every subgroup. Sometimes some are overrepresented and some are underrepresented. So this is our opportunity to really evaluate again, which aligns not only with our statement on equity at the department, your efforts as well, and in the strategic vision and direction. More flexibility with the new law. Currently, Perkins funds can only be utilized as low as the 7th grade. The new law extends that down to the 5th grade. We understand fully that career development doesn't start in high school. So this, I think, reiterates that and allows us more flexibility now to use funds as early as 5th grade. As I mentioned previously, very intentionally, Perkins 5 aligns directly with ESSA and WIOA. Our accountability measures that we are held accountable to align with our state's definitions that we put in ESSA. So everything is going to be linked and aligned, and I think we're all really excited about that. Speaking of data and accountability, Perkins 4 had 7 different accountability indicators. Perkins 5 now only has 5. One of those we get to pick. There is a program quality indicator that has 3 different options for us to select from, which of course we'll spend this next year going through to try to identify. It includes many things that align already with your strategic vision and direction, work-based learning opportunities, early post-secondary opportunities, including dual credit, and earning a post-secondary credential while in high school. So we will really need to think through that one as well. Also a change, as I mentioned in the very first slide, we have 2 different levels of participation in career ed. A participant, just somebody who's maybe taking a course here, trying to figure out where they land, and then those concentrators who really kind of narrow their focus and continue taking courses in that area. Our accountability measures will only include concentrators. So it will be looking at graduation rates, English language arts performance, mathematics performance, non-traditional participation based on their gender, only on those concentrators. So that's a pretty big switch. Another difference is we've been negotiating our accountability indicators annually with the federal government. In the new law, we will set those, they're calling state-determined levels of performance for the duration of our state plan. So we'll be working with our psychometrician and really thinking about where is our baseline that we're going to collect this year, and then projecting out sufficient progress as we move forward. And we will set that, be in our state plan for your review as well. Throughout this next year, as we develop this plan, the law requires much greater consultation with very specific groups spanning from the governor, the state board, of course, all of our post-secondary partners, members that represent subgroups and special populations, heavy business and industry, of course, community involvement. So we have a lot of work groups on our team, and we're getting some help from some prepaid federal supports like the regional education labs that Corey mentioned earlier, and a bunch of other great experts to help us think through this and make sure. I know we've talked in front of the board with our standards development process, always trying to engage stakeholders to the greatest extent. So we have a lot of great ideas. We're talking about videos yesterday, all kinds of stuff. So just briefly, where I think we have opportunities in as a state to think through with the new law, of course, is that alignment piece. So if it's aligned to ESSA and WIOA, now's our opportunity to make sure our Perkins plan and career and technical education also aligns with your strategic vision and direction for the state. As I mentioned previously, we have that program quality indicator that we're going to need to select one of those 3 options that you see on the screen. We also have an opportunity throughout this year to really look deeply in the data and make sure all of our students in the state have equitable opportunities for success in these programs across all groups. We will need to figure out that split of funds and provide a rationale based on the secondary, post-secondary split. We will also need to figure out those state-determined levels of accountability. Look across the state. We do this often. We've got great relationships with our Department of Labor and Department of Economic Development and all of those other core partners from WIOA. And figure out where are we duplicating efforts, where can we complement each other, and make sure, again, systems for the state, not just education, but all of our workforce development systems align. One other thing is currently we have a statewide Perkins consortium called Partnerships for Innovation, which is pretty unique. And I think throughout this process, we will need to identify the needs of a statewide Perkins consortium, which was written into our last state plan. And then, of course, continue working across all the other departments here at NDE, Amy in special education, and folks, Lindy from VR, and we've already started this process. We've identified so many different opportunities with this reorganization of the agency where we're able to really work together. They're all the same students, so special ed students are also CTE students. So how can we make sure we're doing what's best for kids and making it as easy for schools and districts to implement as possible? I think that was quicker than yesterday.
Committee members? Rachel?
Yeah, just a quick question that I didn't ask yesterday, and thank you again. And that's in Perkins 4, schools either had to meet a dollar threshold to stand alone or be in a consortium. Did that carry into Perkin 5, and did they make any changes in those threshold levels?
It's the exact same as Perkins
Okay.
4. So if a individual district through that formula doesn't receive an allocation of at least $15,000, they must consort, because the law and a lot of other grants do this as well, feel like that allocation isn't sufficient for quality of programs and size of programs, to really be effective. So that is the same, and we'll use the ESUs probably as the hub for those consortiums.
Any other committee members want to add anything, or? Yeah, go ahead.
You were going rather quickly, so I just wanted to
I'm so sorry.
define for me. I love your energy, incidentally. But anyway, so non-traditional classes not determined or determined, I couldn't figure out if it was by gender.
Yes.
Could you explain that to me?
I'd be happy to. For a host of reasons and a long history in career and technical education, ensuring that male and females have opportunities in fields that are non-traditional for their gender, and that's determined by a percentage working in that field for gender. So a great example of is like men in healthcare. So any of our courses in health sciences would be considered non-traditional for men. And again, these are at federal levels. So we are held accountable for a percentage of men participating in those non-traditional fields. And that's true across the country. And that's just one example.
For equity.
That's exactly right.
Got it. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Anyone else have questions? All right, and then just to, okay. Of course.
First of all, thank you. Good job. I'm a little out of breath, by the way. That's all right.
They told me to go quick.
Workforce development, fifth grade. You keep working on that, because there is a lot of research out there that they're talking workforce development even at the early childhood levels too. So I appreciate the fact that you've got it down. I'll give you credit for getting it down to fifth grade, but it could go all the way down. Okay, thanks. But thank you very much, and thank you, Chairman.
Well, you're welcome. Just an update will be given next month on the world languages, and this was, our whole committee wanted this to come out for everybody to hear, and you can see why there's so much going on, improvement in the reauthorization. So thank you, Katie and Dawn, as they go into the sunset. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa Fricky. Thank you very much, ma'am.
You're welcome.
Patsy Coe-Johns, please report on the AQuESTT Student Success and Access Domain Committee meeting, please.
Yes, well, I was lucky enough to have both new members on the school board on my committee. And so I was particularly glad, because I thought they probably won't know that I'm new to the leadership position. And so they'll think this is, Robin says, it's just the way it's supposed to be.
That's good.
So anyway, we had, first of all, Amy Rohn came to us and talked to us about MTSS and the conference that's coming up. And I'm particularly interested in this because I've attended, I think, almost everything that they've done to support them. And the conference coming up is pretty exciting because they outgrew their venue. And so in order to accommodate that, they needed to go to a new venue, and they're going to, and I never can say this, Yoon Center in Kearney, and they've they're hoping for 1,200 people. And I know the first one I went to was pretty small, and then it got larger, so that's pretty exciting. It means you're doing a great job with what you're doing. And the contract is over $50,000, so that's why they had to come to us. It had to be brought to the board so that we recognize that it costs more than that for what they're doing. But we'll vote on that a little bit later. The committee supported this decision to move, and the expenditure as well. So we'll vote on that a little bit later. Committee members, do you want to add to that? Okay. All right. The second item, I'm going to bring two people forward, Carrie and Lindy, from VR, to talk to you about the next contract.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Lindy Foley, and I'm the administrator for the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. And I would like to take just a moment of your time to remind you of the work that we are doing in Nebraska VR before we talk about a specific contract that we're proposing for your consideration today. In Nebraska VR, we have a mission to help people with disabilities find, prepare for, and keep jobs. And we also have a responsibility to work with employers, with businesses, to make sure that they can find and keep qualified applicants. So with that in mind, you realize then that our mission very much aligns and supports the work of the department to prepare all Nebraskans for learning, earning, and living. We have VR staff in all of the high schools across the state. They're working side by side with educators and administrators to make sure that we're all working to help prepare students with disabilities for the world of work. But in addition to all of the efforts that we have in the schools, we also have a wide scope of work that's happening to support adults with disabilities. So today we are presenting to you some efforts that we hope to have in place to support a specific population. So Carrie is going to highlight the contract that we have ahead of you today.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Carrie Bennett. I'm our program director in VR for acquired brain injury, and I manage our federal traumatic brain injury grant from the Administration for Community Living, and have done that for a number of years now. And what we're bringing to you today is a request that you grant the commissioner authority to contract with John M. Ferrone Management Consulting Incorporated for a traumatic brain injury network capacity building contract. And this is a contract for the first year of a 3-year project to build a voice-driven association and a corresponding network of individuals with brain injury of all ages, including children and youth and their families. The association and network will develop leadership skills and be equipped to help shape policies, programs, and services that impact individuals with brain injury across the state. The estimated cost is $88,500 annually for 3 years, and the contractor is actually going to provide an additional $70,500 annually and in kind to help with our state match for this federal grant. And as I indicated before, the source of the funding is the Federal Administration for Community Living, TBI grant. The grant really is all about access to services and supports for folks with brain injury. It's very difficult for them sometimes to locate the right kinds of services and supports in their communities. Many folks live in very rural areas, don't have access to cognitive rehabilitation, therapies, and other supports. And so what we're hoping to do with this particular project is to help build that voice so that they are able to better advocate for change across the state. So very excited to talk with you about this project.
Do you have any questions of the presenters? Our committee supported this. We were happy to see that it was a matched grant. That means that there's support for it someplace else besides this little committee. And I was lucky enough to work on the policy committee when TBI was brought in to that policy committee, and some of you who worked on it as well know that there's definitely a need for help for this. So we voted, we expressed support for this grant, and so we'll be asking you to do that later as well. So thank you so much for coming up and doing your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay. The next thing I'm going to go to, and you have papers in front of you, is the equity lens. And at your direction last month, you asked me to come back with the equity lens with some ideas of how we might take this equity lens from another state and make it more Nebraska. And just to summarize what an equity lens is, the new members were on my committee, so they we had a huge discussion about it, so I feel like they know, but to remind you, it is a method of checking your thinking for bias. And we are all biased in some ways, but as state board members, we want to make sure that the decisions that we make for kids across Nebraska are as bias-free as possible. And this was presented to me, this whole idea, in a national project called LEAP, which I've been to several of their meetings and online meetings as well, and phone meetings. So at any rate, when I saw it, I thought this would make us stop and think when we're making choices. And so when I brought it to you, you said you were interested in it. And I also was interested in making sure that it was Nebraska's equity lens. And when I said that, I think you guys were in agreement for that. So I'm coming back to you with step 2 today. And this is not an action item. This is an ongoing process. I see it as like several months down the road, and so does the committee. But so you know what has happened between then and now. A group, I put together a group, as I told you I was going to. The group represented a wide variety of people that perhaps might be affected by equity bias. There was an immigrant person, different races, LGBTQ person. Anyway, they sat for several hours and worked on this, and then one of the team members and I went back and worked on this to put it together so that it all made sense. To us anyway. Doesn't have to make any sense to everyone right away. But these are the ideas that they came up with. And I don't necessarily want us to go through them line by line today, but I want you to take a careful look at it and come back with your ideas to add to it. And in our conversations, we decided that there were some needed steps that had not been taken, like some of the organizations like this, the Council of State School Boards, and some of those major organizations. We want to take it to them and see what they think about it. We know NASB supports it because that was who presented LEAP. So we know that. But now, what are our other Nebraska organizations? What can we glean from them as well? And we also want to pick your brains about it. So what I'm going to ask you now to do is just, if you have any other questions about this, and next month, or somewhere along the line, if you want to call me, have coffee, do conversation, discuss it, to give your ideas, or you just want to email me, whatever. To make this grow into a really, really valid equity lens for our state board. Questions? Yes.
I just wanted to say, this idea of equity that you shared back from LEAP, if you notice in most of the presentations, that word is present. This month, last month, and it just seems like it's getting to be more of an awareness. And I attribute it to our work, but you being involved in LEAP and sharing that with us. So thank you.
Well, I wanted to give credit, and I didn't right away, but to our commissioner who established this as the year of equity. And I want every year to be a year of equity. There are many things in my life that have guided me toward that. Personal experiences have guided me toward that, and so I'm part of the Fighting Irish, McCann, this morning, and I decided, Superintendent McCann and I decided we're part of the Fighting Irish, and so I want to be a champion of equity. You challenged me to do that, and I want to be a champion for that. So I want us to make the very best decisions, and I'm willing to do the work to make that happen.
Yeah, and the Commissioner, when you gave that presentation in Kearney, that was a powerful message to every single person in that room. And so I'm glad that our board and
staff and everybody's making this a priority, not just for a month or a year, but for a lifetime.
And
Thank
that's
you.
one place we want to go back to is that speech and see what else from that speech.
That was powerful. So
should
thank
go
you,
into that.
Commissioner.
Yeah, yep. Okay, so I'll be waiting to hear from you, and I expect to hear from you. That's your assignment, okay? Thus says the teacher. Okay, let's see. We have one more, I think. Okay, this is an action item. Let's see, the committee discussed the contract proposal which allows the commissioner to contract with the University of Nebraska to build the public schools in the area, emergency management, emergency management. This sounds foreign, but you know what this is. This is what we've had presentation on for several meetings about preparing our schools to face emergencies. And the board members might remember that we were accepting a grant at a previous meeting from the U.S. Department of Education to assist in these efforts. Jolene was the person who presented to us, and this contract is funded from that grant as part of the project. I don't remember, Ryan, who presented to us. Do you remember?
Mark might be able to speak more.
Oh, yeah. Mark, will you speak to this more? Because it was supposed to be Diane Stumer, and she was at another meeting, so.
Good morning. Mark Schultz, Deputy Commissioner. The contract is really with the Public Policy Center, which is a part of the university, and they're going to be going out and conducting training at 8 sites across the state, basically to be able to develop implementation plans and strategies for emergency management within the schools. So this is implementing the federal grant as proposed.
Okay, all right. Questions of Mark? All right. Our committee agreed with approving this grant and supported it, and we'll be also voting on that later as a board.
Complete? Complete?
Complete.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cojon.
You're welcome.
I'll report on the Budget and Finance Committee meeting. We have one proposed action item, and that is to approve the 2019-21 NDE, NAPE, AFSCME bargaining agreement, and I don't even know what that acronym means, so I'm going to ask Joel Sherlin to come up here and give us a briefing on this, please.
Morning, thank you. So every 2 years we bargain with, we call it NAPE AFSCME, so it's the name of the union we bargain with. This agreement covers about 350 of our 490 employees who are basically non-management employees. The NDE personnel rules cover the supervisors and offices like Commissioner's Office, HR, and legal, those kind of folks. So in your meeting materials, you have a summary that details all the changes, which are mostly technical in nature. There really aren't a lot of substantive changes to major terms of employment. You see the proposed salary increases. All of these major changes are in line with what was negotiated with the master agreement, which covers the majority of state employees outside of the outside of us. Since we're a constitutional agency, we bargain separately, but what we bargain aligns with what's bargained for the master contract. So with that, I'd be happy to respond to any questions about the proposed changes to the agreement.
Seeing no questions, Joel. Also for the committee members, the committee was in support of this action item. Thank you, Joel.
Thank you.
Sir. Next, Rachel Wise, please report on the Strategic Planning, Performance, and Improvement Committee meeting.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Ann Herman and Sarah Cochin to come forward. The strategic planning committee focused really on the strategic planning review. That's the primary thing that we accomplished. I would like to thank my colleagues who are on that committee, Maureen, Patsy, and Lisa. We spent time in a conference call, as well as both in our meeting time yesterday and yesterday afternoon, in working through our report for today. Our report for today has two components. One is the report of the external review, and you have that in your documents in Spark. And we're going to walk through a PowerPoint that Ann Herman and Sarah Cochin have prepared to walk through what their findings have been. Then we're going to spend a few minutes walking through the recommendations based on that report and some of the next steps of the committee and then the next steps of the board. So with that, I will turn it over to Ann and to Sarah Ann. And thank you again for being here and for all your work in pulling together the review and the data that you pulled together that's a part of your report. So thank you.
Sure. Well, good morning again to everyone. I wanted to start by some official formal thank yous. First and foremost, I think to the internal staff members as well as the Strategic Planning Performance and Improvement Committee members, those present and former committee members and the staff were really key partners in helping us gather information, summarize information, make sense of information, pushing us to ask more questions, less questions, all of that. So we really wanted to start by thanking everyone who's been involved to date. I also want to mention that you do have, as Rachel has mentioned, the report at your availability, and we are going to give, I'm hesitant, there's at least one former media member and one media member, the 5 o'clock news summary of the report, given that I really want to hold time for Dr. Wise and the committee to present your recommendations. So with that, we'll get started. Please do pause if we have questions, especially for our newly joined board members or anyone for that matter. So, oh, this is a PDF, okay. All right, just to ground us in really what we tried to understand, there were really 3 primary questions we wanted to answer with this review. You know, what was happening in and around the department as the strategic plan was implemented? In addition, where has progress been made on the goals? And what things do we need to think about, both in terms of content in the strategic plan as well as the processes around managing that work? What things do we really need to think about adapting? You've already heard today from some of the colleagues in the department of changes as S has been implemented and Reauthorization Act of Perkins 5, et cetera, et cetera. There's been a lot of things happening in and around the work. So we wanted to see what do we need to take into account and change as we move forward. Just to remind everybody, we were incredibly thorough with gathering data and insights for this process. We used multiple methods, starting first and foremost with really understanding that what I just talked about. What was happening in and around the Department of Education when we implemented the strategic plan? The reality is that anytime you do good work around implementing a strategic plan, it's not happening in a vacuum. There was all kinds of things that the department was being asked to do. There were changes being made at the federal level, at the state level, et cetera. We really wanted to understand what else was happening in and around the time that this work was launched. In addition, we did a really good job of gathering data from in-depth interviews that we did with many members of this board, except for our 2 new joined members, with staff members, and also with external constituents. So stakeholders such as our partners in the ESUs, local school district folks, a couple of folks from the NSEA, et cetera. We really tried to get a great understanding from folks around what did they know about our strategic plan, what things would help them know more about our strategic plan, et cetera. We also did quite a few interactions with the staff, both in terms of the cross-division meetings, which happen on a monthly basis, as well as some guided workshops where we dug into some of the information around the strategic plan, what had been done to date, and what needed to be done going forward. We did a quantitative survey to gather insights from board members and internal staff members. We also did, we spent some time reviewing the progress reports that have been submitted through the commissioner's reports as well as to the board to date on the progress of the strategic planning goals. And then finally, and I know Rachel will speak more about this, and it's not something we're going to cover in depth today, but the internal team did a great job in working on a report to share with you that really talks about the progress that's been made to the strategic planning goals, as well as gives a guidance of where things have gone when we started to where they are today. So some real highlights of the environmental scan. One of the largest pieces of work really focused on things that align to goal 1.1 in the strategic plan, and that really had to do with the NDE, the department reorganization. This was an incredible amount of work that happened, both in terms of role clarity, role change. We saw quite a few things, offices being aligned, et cetera. Really a brand new structure to the department, and that was a significant amount of work which needed to be highlighted and understood that as that was happening, we were implementing brand new pieces of work, in some cases through the strategic plan goals. In addition, we really would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the turnover. You may not know this, or you probably do in your mind, but 4 of the board members that sit with us today weren't involved in the creation of the strategic plan, and that's some lost knowledge. It's not that it's a bad thing, right? We just need to know that there's some history and experience that we need to make sure our new colleagues understand. Similarly, within the department, there was turnover at the staff level as well, and without understanding that when you lose some folks, you do lose that history, experience, and sometimes those transitions to the onboarding of a new person in a new role. We just needed to know that, again, the work was not being implemented by the team that started with the work. In addition, and there's a lot of detail, and I want to specifically thank Shane Rian for helping us with this, there's a lot of detail about some of the budget changes that happened in the bienniums that were covered during the implementation of the strategic plan. Oh, he's left. But I was going to look to him. The department saw an almost $5 million hit in their operations dollars to the department during that time. And I don't know about you, but I'm pretty confident that $5 million had a pretty big impact on some things that were scheduled to be done and things that had to get done in a new creative way in some cases. But there's a lot of detail about that in your report. In addition, as I've mentioned before, and I know some of our colleagues that spoke before us today have mentioned, that ESSA was authorized during this time and was being rolled out, and that was a whole new wave of information that had to be integrated, right, and had to be thought about in conjunction with the strategic plan, not to mention that the work around AQuESTT was also happening at that time. So I want to take a pause and see if anyone has questions about just what was happening during the time of the implementation of the strategic plan. No? Okay. So I think what you really asked us to do is tell us where our opportunities are. Tell us what you know about what is related to the strategic plan work to date. And I've spent many months coming and giving updates to this group, and you know that I have, Sarah Ann and I have really shared our admiration for the amount of work and the effort and just the great things that have been happening around the strategic plan work. But what we're going to highlight today is really more about where are our opportunities? Where are some things that we saw that we know we can do a little different, maybe a little better, maybe more of? And that's where we're going to spend our time. So first and foremost, the size of the current plan is quite large. 27 goals is a lot to manage, a lot to keep focus on. And quite frankly, in some ways, our structure hasn't highlighted the immense amount of work that some particular goals have really taken up. And I point to goal 1.1 as a great example of that, right? It occupies the same amount of quote unquote real estate on our plan, but I can tell you that if we were to visually represent the amount of work that went into goal 1.1 and that still continues to go into goal 1.1, you would see an overwhelming amount of work tied to that goal in the first couple years of the strategic plan implementation. Secondarily, and this is not a surprise, we always can get better at communication, but there has been a lot of good communication relating to the strategic plan, both for the internal staff members, with respect across the board members, and also with external stakeholders. But in a lot of ways, we see quite a few opportunities to really align and enhance that communication. We talked with the committee a lot about effective and consistent communication at all levels and across all levels of stakeholders, be they internal staff members, board members, or also our external colleagues and stakeholders out across the state. There is a real excitement for folks to take advantage of the SMART process of putting the review in. That was one of the great things that the State Board of Education did do, is made space for a formal review. And folks are excited to be able to have this opportunity to think about what's in the plan, what do we need to adapt to align to new standards, new learnings, et cetera. So there is a lot of support for that, and I'm excited to see that process unfold. In addition, with respect to implementation across the plan, there definitely could be some enhancements done on this systemic work being done across departments. And what I mean by that is it would be a really great thing to see alignment across implementation planning progress reports, alignment across, and I know we talked about this in committee, each goal has a set upon group of progress indicators, and the cadence or the calendar with which we report on those, we give some thought to, and it's done in the same manner across all the goals. And finally, I do think that having some calendared, and I'll borrow that word from committee, some calendared dates on which we release the progress formally, both to the board committees as well as the full board and across to public constituents of the strategic plan. I think there'd be some real gains if we came up with a regular progress monitoring and reporting schedule. So any questions, thoughts? Yes, Ms. Ricky.
I don't know, oops, I know. In your report, you talked about goals, and some of the goals as strategies and some as tasks. And I wondered, with the goals, if some of the strategies and tasks could be underneath a particular goal and fit well. If you had some time to think about that, and maybe would that be a direction to kind of help what you're talking about?
You bet, and Ms. Fricke and I have had a few conversations about this. So what we're talking about is across those 27 goals, are there opportunities to maybe cluster-like work together? And the first answer to that is absolutely. I think that the internal team, and I want to thank the deputy commissioners and their colleagues and leaders in the divisions for taking a big piece of this work forward, have already looked at how do we map the goals in the strategic plan to the tenets of AQuESTT. And I tell you, I think that in and of itself is a huge smart move. It's a taxonomy, right? The tenets of AQuESTT are a taxonomy that are spread not across the Department of Education, but also across the state to our colleagues out in the local school districts and in the ESUs. Let's take advantage of that, right? But I think more to Ms. Fricke's point, are there even opportunities for those goals to be consolidated, integrated, or thought about just slightly differently within those goals? And I definitely think that's the case. To answer your question, you've seen us a lot the last couple days, so we haven't mapped that out, but I do think that's part of the recommendations Dr. Wise will share on behalf of the committee going forward. So is to really think about how do we do that next. Yep. But great, I'm glad you brought that up, because I know we talked about it quite a bit in committee meetings.
I didn't realize that was on there.
No. So thank you for bringing that up. Yes.
Madam Chairman?
Yes,
I just, and I'm asking maybe you or members of the committee as well as you. Okay, did I hear 27 goals? Am I hearing that? And yeah, I see the nine areas, is that right? 9 areas of the strategic plan, from
yes,
shared vision.
Yes,
Okay,
part of the original.
and then I see and my counting is right, 45 indicators. Now, what's the difference? Just a quick question. Difference. Am I looking at the wrong thing?
I think
here?
you're looking at the wrong thing right now.
I'm looking
I
at
think you're looking at
evaluation now.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
so you've
But that's a big issue, because I see the commissioner's evaluation and his plan to improve. Obviously, he needs lots of it.
Ouch is all I gotta say.
So I guess I'm sorry, Commissioner, please. I'm just really concerned about this length, and I just share some of the comments that I heard from Lisa, and I see you're wanting me to be quiet so you can respond.
No, I think we need to get copies. It would be helpful, I think, one of the things, to have copies of the front and back page, yes.
Yeah.
That would be good
Yeah.
for, I think, all board members to have in front.
Yes.
The one page is, I think, very helpful. And I think there is crossover from the other piece. What we'll do is as we move through some of the elements of the report, and I think you also have a print copy of the report in front of you.
Yeah, right.
We'll finalize some things with the report, and then we'll get into an in-depth discussion of what are some of our next steps. We have a lot of work to do.
Right.
Bottom
Sure,
line,
sure.
we have a lot of work to do, and what has been pointed out for us helps to really guide where we need to go forward. So,
I just want to reemphasize, though, Madam Chairman, what I think Lisa said and what I'm hearing everybody say, that really there needs to be a tremendous amount of consolidation with some
right,
of this.
and we'll talk about some of it
Yeah.
when we get to recommendations.
Fair enough. Thank you.
And I want to take a moment to point out that the goals that were put on the original plan and the structure of the original plan was done with a lot of heavy lifting and a lot of work at that time. I think one of the things we have now is the benefit of 2+ years have passed, right? And we can think about how that structure has worked with us. And the great smart thing, one of the great smart things this board did is set aside a formal really review period that allowed us to say, okay, now what do we know? Well, we've had great success with AQuESTT and AQuESTT being rolled out across the state. That's a framework that we share. Those tenets are, talked about and linked to many things. Let's think about how does our plan map it? So there's some learnings that we're in a great position to be able to take advantage of. So though I absolutely echo the concept of rethinking maybe the structure or how we have it laid out and doing the integration and consolidation, I just want to make mention that I think when the plan was launched, it was done with great care and a lot of thought being put into how it was structured at the time. So,
if I could respond here, Madam Chair. Just quick comment. I'm not meaning to
Sure.
be critical,
Sure.
but I think if we look at, I don't know, research or whatever, if you have goals beyond 5, what's going to happen is either some are going to be totally ignored, or we're not going to do a good job on any of them because the others have to be so watered down. So that's just a personal thought that I feel I need to share.
Sure, no, and
Okay,
you're
thank you.
absolutely right. Evidence-based research, it's shown us that trying to focus on more than 3 to 5 things puts you at you're really having to work extra hard to accomplish those. So I appreciate very much that you shared that. Just to guide everyone through the next steps, obviously we're presenting in today's meeting, and as we've mentioned, you do have the report at your, you have access to the report and are welcome to read that and respond, and let Dr. Wise and the committee know if you have any questions or if you need us to respond to anything. In addition, we want to move forward to the committee's recommendations that they have worked on, in partnership obviously with us and the work that came out of the report, but also through their discussions in at least 2 meetings this week and another meeting last night, and I know another meeting on the calendar on Monday. So with that, I want to ask Dr. Weiss to join in, and if there's anything you'd like us to add, please just let us know.
Thank you, Ann, and thank you, Sarah Ann, for all the work that you've done in consolidating a lot of information that you've gathered and giving us some real guidance. And so as Ann and Sarah Ann were sharing, what the committee has been doing is looking at this information, looking at the report, looking at other information that was provided that's not really public information, but information that helped to build the report. And the committee has started a framework of coming up with our specific committee recommendations for the full board. This is a beginning step, and you have homework. Not just from Patsy. You have homework from our committee as well, because the response to where we go from here is dependent upon our engagement as a board and the input from the commissioner and the commissioner's team as a part of the process. And so our next steps first begin on having clarity in a set of recommendations and actions that we need to take moving forward. What we don't need to do is jump in and say, let's change this, let's change this, let's change this. We need to be strategic in our next step of action relative to these recommendations. So we need to be thoughtful about what we've learned from the great work that was done in the review, what we've learned from putting things into practice, what we learned from the internal team of great folks at NDE who are living and breathing these processes, but what we've learned from things we need to do to make our strategic plan truly a part of our operational processes, and understanding how it's being used to guide the work and the decisions that we make. So not only do we have an equity lens that needs to guide our work, our strategic plan needs to guide our work. And I think one of the takeaways from my view in the report was maybe it hasn't been front and center. And so those are some of the things that we'd like to talk about. So I'm just going to go through. You have a draft document in front of you from the committee, and I want to thank the committee again. The time they have spent with the input we've received to start. This is a beginning. This is a 2 pages of thoughts. This is not inclusive of thoughts yet from staff. It's not inclusive of thoughts from the full board, but we need to get your voice in these recommendations. So I'm going to talk briefly about the broad recommendations and not go into detail. Right now we have 5 broad recommendations. Those recommendations include clarify roles and responsibilities of Nebraska State Board of Education members as it relates to the strategic plan. No different than the equity lens from my partner to the left. We need to think about what our roles and responsibilities will be around the strategic plan. And that's an important piece that we need to work through as a board. 2, create well-defined communication processes and sharing information regarding progress on the strategic plan. We need to think through what are effective communication from my right, effective communication strategies that will keep us all, and not just us, but as was pointed out in the report, our external stakeholders, all internal stakeholders, and each of us as board members. 3rd is to review the strategic plan to determine areas of need for revision relative to the structure and goals. That's what gets into Robin, to Lisa. We do need to delve in. We do need to take a look at it. And one of the ahas that I think came forward, and I would say this came forward from my view, from staff, at least it's what was shared. And staff spent some real time as they looked at how to define progress and charting out progress in kind of 2 areas. And they broke those goals in an area that I would say are process goals. What are some of the actions and activities they're getting done? And then there's a whole series of goals, and I think they were great in starting to pull this together, would have been labeled more as aspirational goals. And I think we struggled with that in the development of the strategic plan, because those aspirational goals are really critical for us in the sense of we want to know that education is improving in Nebraska. We want to know that the outcomes that we believe for kids, for all kids, that trajectory of change is going up. And that's where we established goals that had a type of metric that we're not responsible for that metric, but in essence we're responsible for the conditions, and we're responsible for a frame of accountability. And earlier, I think Blaine really hit that home. That's part of our responsibility. And so those have been framed by staff, and I think that's how it evolved, as being kind of these aspirational goals. Those are still really important, but maybe we shouldn't call those goals of our strategic plan. Maybe they are a subset series of aspirational goals that are important for us to monitor, important for us to guide our work. But we've got a lot of work to do to really talk about those 27 goals and what truly are our goals versus strategies, tasks, or really aspirational goals or aspirational ideals, whatever those might be. Our 4th area is to integrate Nebraska State Board of Education processes and committees with strategic plan. We're not doing that. When we look in our committee structures, when we talk about our committees, we don't have a link to what our agendas are, whether it be at our board, whether it be our committee, that says we're talking about career and tech ed today because it's important for transitions, and it helps to look at what our goals are around transition. We need to think differently about how we, again, are integrating our strategic plan in our work. And again, that's a piece we need your input and thoughts on. How should we do that? And then our fifth broad recommendation area is to implement future progress monitoring. And that, I think, is thinking about that in a multi-tiered approach. And I think in some ways when we put forward to do the review in 2 years, we had a lot of work being done that was development work, so to speak, organizational development, organizational transformation, that we didn't think about how do we really set out this progress monitoring, other than we knew we were going to do this 2-year review. And I think that 2-year review has led us to and has given us insight into how should we now create a multi-process approach to our monitoring and our looking at our progress on our strategic plan. And it may be multi-tiered in the sense of continuing an external review at periodic times. What would an annual review look like? What should a quarterly review look like? What are those elements that become important as part of the process? And I think that's some of the work that we have going forward. So what you have in front of you is watermarked draft. It's a preliminary discussion document for you to take a look at, and for not only you as board members, but we're asking for the team, the internal team at NDE, provide some input on these recommendations. Our goal as a committee will be to come back in March with a document that you'll take action on. And so in March, we'll ask you to take action on our recommendations of next steps for the strategic plan. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to come forward in March with a revised strategic plan. That means we're going to come forward in March with a document similar to what you have here, maybe rewritten, maybe different elements, might look a little different, but probably something similar to a 1, 2, 3 page, if that, wherever it lands, series of recommendations that will guide our next steps. And within those series of recommendations, the one thing that we've learned as well is that we need some specificity and timelines, calendaring as a part of that process, so that these recommendations don't get put on a shelf, that we really move forward with what some of the recommendations that have come from this external review. Are there questions? Pat?
Yeah, I certainly understand the calendaring. That's a new word.
Yeah.
And timeline. Have you talked at all, or is that something that will enter the conversation later on, as to whether some of these goals take priority?
That would be the work under number 3.
Okay.
Review the strategic plan to determine areas. Those are the things we need. Those are the things that we need to make sure we hear from you.
Okay.
So a bullet might be about ensuring there's prioritization of the goals.
Okay.
So that's what we need to hear, so that this guide helps us go forward and captures all of your thoughts as well as the commissioners' team's thoughts on what do we need to do next as we move forward with our strategic plan.
Okay.
So look at and maybe the category, when you look at it, maybe you're thinking that's not the right category. Anything in this document is open for your input. The committee is meeting, yes, Monday, and again, March 5th. And whether we'll have additional conference call in between is still yet to be determined, but we are on what we believe is a committee, and I want my committee, please speak up, short time frame to come back in March with these are the recommendations and the next steps for your approval. And we'd like to see that as an action item, so that we know everyone's on board, that this is the next steps in the direction we need to take.
Okay. Thank you.
Deborah?
I don't know how many more meetings, maybe a couple more, that I'm going to precede everything I say by reminding everyone I'm the newbie, okay? So
You can only use that so long.
I can only.
We're counting.
Time
Yeah,
limitation.
you're counting. So I heard you say that ESSA hadn't been approved by us, our plan, when this was created. And so Is that right? Did you say that?
I believe ESSA legislation, I'm gonna look to
No,
the
the
commissioner.
national, but our plan for
Yeah,
Nebraska.
correct.
Yes,
Correct.
okay, yeah.
The guidelines hadn't been cascaded out into across the state.
The water falls back.
Water falls back. So there were just, and part of that's like, there's no right, sometimes you don't
Yeah.
control some of those
Right.
those
That's right.
timelines, right?
But, so my question is, at what frequency are we required to be reviewing that? And is there any synergy between the two that? they
There's
should
lots
be-
of synergy is
that
what
they
I-
should be aligned?
Yeah, there's lots of synergy. I mean, we did a lot of our work around the ESSA plan that
Oh,
was
you already
tied
did.
to things within the strategic plan. Now, some of that had to change based on our reviews back and forth with the U.S. Department of Education. So, but the intention was that those would be aligned, and there's probably some of that still has to be done. I would rather lead with our state, with the board's strategic plan, than feel like we're being driven by the ESSA plan, if that makes sense to you. Yeah.
Absolutely.
However, I think you bring up a really good point. Because the way ESSA happened in the midst of, but I think one of the guiding philosophies of the board has been that the plan drives, not the federal, so we're not gonna have two accountability systems, we're not.
Right.
But we just had the presentation on current tech ed, and in developing a state plan for current tech ed, you know, that should not be something separate that's not a part of and integrated in. So I think that's a part of our shift. How do we ensure that we are integrating those processes ideally ahead of time rather than after the fact? ESSA was a little more after than before. We have the opportunity with Perkins and probably with whatever happens with IDEA to shift that directive a little bit.
Thank you.
Okay, other comments or questions? Lisa?
I just want to make sure that I heard what I thought I heard. These recommendations, the staff will have a chance for input before, what time? I mean, will they get input right away? I mean,
That'll be the commissioner will take care of however he wants to
Okay.
handle that. That's his prerogative, but the timeline is that we have a document coming back for action in March. And so for our committee, we've kind of mapped out some of those dates already, but we want to have a document that's put forward to the full board for action in March.
I just want to make sure that I heard that the staff would be able to give input on that. Okay, very good.
Maureen?
And I just want to add to that it was important to me that as a committee, we continue, because there is so much work to do, that we continue our conversations sooner than later while it is still fresh in our minds. And so that's why we chose to try to get together as early as possible next week.
Last night.
Last night.
We met last night. And,
Yeah.
Afterwards. Robin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quick, and this is just from my perspective. Okay, I see the strategic plan perception survey.
Yeah.
Is that something, do we have a copy? Do I have a copy of that? Just haven't read it yet?
No,
And if so, where can I find it? And then the other thing is how was it or is it to be used?
Okay, so let me speak, I'll speak to that. So one of the things that we determined kind of late in the process, like November or whatever, I don't know the time frame.
November, you're
And
right.
Pat, you might remember the time frame from discussions at the committee before, that we wanted to add on top of what the interviews were done was a type of perception survey. And so Ann and Sarah Ann put together a perception survey that was sent to staff and to board members. And that perception survey had an intended goal of feeding information for the report. That survey gave some information, but there probably wasn't the response that we would like to see because of the short time period, it being in December. And so whether it be from board or from staff, it just didn't really give the percentage of responses and those responses were pretty differentiated across the responses. But what it did do is led us to, that's probably something that should be added.
under goal, or 5, recommendation 5, I believe it will be, is that we probably should do some sort of annual survey. And so what we learned from that, and what our takeaway is, that that is an important part of the process that may need to be incorporated, not necessarily just in an external review, but possibly as a part of an internal monitoring process. So those are some of the things. I think we can get a copy of the survey that was used probably to you, but not the results, because the results, they fed the report that we got from the external review. Does that help? And Commissioner, did I miss anything? Please, by all means.
The one thing I'd say is that the survey was actually done by third party, so
Right,
it wasn't our survey, so that's all
right.
part of, they're putting that within their report back to us. But I do think it's a really good point, and we've had a lot of conversations about, okay, should this be part of our regular review or regular process inside the agency? So that gives us a good, I won't call it baseline, but a baseline approach perhaps relative to things that we might do going forward. And I do think it ought to be part of the recommendations in the committee's.
So that's where, and again, thank you so very much, Ann and Sarah Ann, you've done a great job. But, excuse me, Pat, yes.
I just got one quick question. When we're talking about this perception review, when we're talking about this perception review, I know that we did, the board and the staff. Did we do that with our stakeholders?
I'm glad you brought this up, and we also may want to think about that one-page memo summary for the other board members.
Yeah.
That could be something, in addition to Mr. Stevens getting him content of the survey, that could be something. So just to remind, and we talked a little bit about this in November when I think we brought it to the board to say we really want to do this survey to capture these things. We knew, at that point we had done our interviews, both with external stakeholders, internal stakeholders, and also staff or board members. And we knew that our external stakeholders would probably have a harder time giving us great input on that survey tool. Now, that being said, I think the commissioner brings up a great point that utilizing a survey tool going forward as one of our recommendations, there could be some thought to what are the right questions, right, to ask our external stakeholders on an annual basis or semi-annual basis.
Well, and I
just
can
to be
see,
fair.
I can see that those external stakeholders, you would need different questions for them.
Quite possibly,
Right.
yep.
Than what
Because
came
of
to
what
us.
you would ask
Right.
us or what
Yeah.
we would ask
Sure.
staff.
Yeah.
And I want to
Okay.
keep in mind too, and just to reiterate this, that the survey tool that was used was one of multiple methods we used to gather data and insight and information. And so I do believe it's a very valuable tool. It gave us great insights, almost to, as the commissioner said, a baseline of information of where are we at this point in time, and how do we craft the right responses through these recommendations, and utilize a tool like that to see down the road in a year, how have those implementations that we've done along the process changes in the recommendations helped to enhance some of our responses. I think that would be a great use of a tool.
Absolutely. Thank you. If there's nothing else on that, then I'm gonna make eye contact with Ryan. Maybe I shouldn't. But if you have input, please send it to Ryan and myself. Either send it to Ryan and CC me, or send it to me and CC Ryan. So between the two of us, we will capture anything to share with the full committee on your recommendations for additions or deletions from our draft recommendation report. Thank you, and I'll turn it back to you.
Mr. President, just quick, I think it's crucial that we say thank you for this.
Absolutely.
Obviously to them, but also to the four ladies who, I just can't even imagine.
They actually, again, thank you for the work.
Mr. Stevens, if it's all right with you, we'll continue on, sir.
Well, I could go to the bathroom in case you're wondering.
We're going to be quick. We'll move now on to our action items of today's agenda. Vice President Nichols, is there a motion on item 7.1 alpha A?
No, because we took all that action yesterday.
Very good. Student Success and Access Domain Committee, Patsy Code Johns, is there a motion on item 7.2.A alpha?
Madam Chair, if I may, I move to grant the Commissioner the authority to contract with, help me with that pronunciation? Eunice Conference Center for the MTSS Conference.
Second.
Get a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing and hearing none. Denise, please call roll.
Fricky,
Yes.
Co-Johns,
Yes.
Neary,
Yes.
Stevens,
Yes.
Wise,
Yes.
Witzel,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Nichols.
Yes.
8 yes.
Thank you, Denise. Patsy Code Johns, is there a motion on item 7.2.B?
Yes.
Madam Chair, if I may, I move to approve the Traumatic Brain Injury, TBI, Network Capacity Building Contract with John M., help me there with that pronunciation, Ferrone Management Consulting Incorporated.
Second.
Second. Discussion? Seeing and hearing none. Denise, please call roll.
Nichols,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Witzel,
Yes.
Wise,
Yes.
Stevens,
Yes.
Neary,
Yes.
Co-Johns,
Yes.
Fricky.
Yes.
8 yes.
Thank you very much, Denise. Patsy Code Johns, is there a motion on item 7.2.D?
Yes, there is.
Chairman, I move to grant the Commissioner the authority to contract with the University of Nebraska to build capacity of public schools in the area of emergency management.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by discussion. Seeing and hearing none. Denise, please call roll.
Wise,
Yes.
Witzel,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Fricky,
Yes.
Co-Johns.
Yes.
Neary,
Yes.
Stevens.
Yes.
8 yes.
8 yes. In regards to budget and finance, I move to approve the 2019-21 NDE NAP AFSCME bargaining agreement.
Second.
Discussion? Seeing and hearing none. Denise, please call roll.
Wise,
Yes.
Stevens,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Co-Johns,
Yes.
Okay.
Fricky,
Yes.
Neary,
Yes.
Witzel.
Yes.
8 yes.
Thank you very much. Approve of consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Any seconds? Second by Pat. Discussion? Seeing and hearing none. Denise, please call roll.
Over here.
Tim,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Wise,
Yes.
Witzel,
Yes.
Neary,
Yes.
Stevens,
Yes.
Fricky,
Yes.
Co-Johns.
Yes.
8 yes.
We're now moving over to board reports, dates, and discussion items. In regards to 10.1.A, thank you for submitting your monthly report. Board member reports are linked on the SPARC. I encourage you to review each of the board members. Commissioner, did you want to comment on 10.2?
Yeah, actually, we're trying to economize a little bit on time. Ryan's actually gonna go through each of the board members that we have to take up as a separate vote. If someone would say so moved, and then obviously if it's about your individual expenses, our approach is that you would abstain on those particular ones. So I'll turn it over to Ryan, and then, like I said, I'll ask that the president would ask someone to make a motion after that, so.
So moved. Is that what you need?
Wait for Ryan's.
Oh.
Let me provide a
I'm
little
ready
more
to go.
context. We're making this from 14 to 6 motions to take care of the same business by reorganizing it, and I want to assure you that we are continuing to work through this so that we are doing it in the most efficient way and following the law.
Can I just,
Question from.
Yeah.
I just noticed that my board report wasn't with the rest of them.
we'll
work
take
on it.
care of that.
Okay, thank you.
President
Yes.
Whitson, just a quick question. Are you also doing in this new change the request for meeting participation, or is this just the ones that took place in the past?
We're gonna take care of the ones in the past and handle the future ones as normal.
Okay.
We might have jumped, did we jump ahead one
Yeah,
item?
we just
Sorry.
didn't do
Sorry
that
about
yet, so I didn't know.
So I think 10.3 is the future
Future.
meeting items.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it. I was looking at 10.1. Got it.
Mr. President, I would ask you to entertain a motion to approve events attended in the past for Patsy Co. Johns on December 3rd, December 10th, December 12th, January 12th, and January 21st.
I make
So
the
moved.
motion.
So moved.
Second?
Discussion? Seeing and hearing none. Denise, please call roll.
Fricky,
Yes.
Co-Johns, Neary,
Yes.
Stevens,
Yes.
Wise,
Yes.
Witzel,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Nichols.
Yes.
7 yes, 1 abstain.
Mr. President, I'd ask you to entertain a motion to approve expenses for meetings attended in the past for Lisa Fricky for events on January 15th, January 21st, and 2 events listed for January 24th.
So move.
Second.
Who was that?
Rachel and Pat
Rachel.
Tim.
Okay.
Discussion?
And- Okay, it's going a little too fast. I'm
Okay,
not
okay.
getting the firsts or the seconds. So who
I
made the
did the
motion?
second. And
Rach-
Pat.
Ra-
Okay. Okay. Are you ready now?
Ready.
Okay. Fricky,
Yes, oh. It's for
Abstain.
Abstain, I know that.
okay, I'm sorry, but I heard Rachel and Pat Tim.
Rachel made the motion.
Oh,
Pat
that's
Tim
not, okay, then
seconded.
who is it
It's
for?
for Lisa Fricky.
Okay, sorry. That was,
And I'll repeat, I abstain.
okay. Co-Johns,
Yes.
Neary,
Yes.
Stevens,
Yes.
Wise,
Yes.
Witzel,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Nichols.
Yes.
7 yes, 1 abstain.
The next will be for Rachel Wise. Mr. President, I ask you to entertain a motion to approve expenses for meetings attended in the past for Rachel Wise on January 23rd and February 1st.
So moved.
Second.
Who said, who made the
Lisa.
motion?
Lisa.
Everybody's
Motion.
voice sounds the same if I don't look.
I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Okay,
Thank-
Lisa and,
Discussion?
Pat Tim made the second.
okay.
Seeing and hearing none. Denise, please call roll.
Fricky,
Yes.
Co-Johns,
Yes.
Neary,
Yes.
Stevens,
Yes.
Wise,
Abstain.
Witzel,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Nichols.
Yes.
7 yes, 1 abstain.
Next will be for Robin Stevens. Mr. President, I ask you to entertain a motion to approve expenses for meeting attended in the past for Robin Stevens on January 23rd.
So moved.
Second?
Patsy and Rachel.
Thank you.
Discussion? Seeing and hearing none. Denise, please call roll.
Wise,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Witzel,
Yes.
thank you. Stevens,
Abstain.
Neary,
Yes.
Fricky,
Yes.
Co-Johns.
Yes.
7 yes, 1 abstain.
The
Thank you.
last for future meetings is for an item for Robin Stevens, Maureen Nichols, and Lisa Fricky. So approval, asking for to entertain a motion to approve expenses for those 3 individuals to attend or when they attended the NASB or NASB Legislative Conference on January 28th. So again, that was for Robin, Maureen, and Lisa on January 28th.
I make the motion?
So, I so move.
Second.
Good. Discussion?
Yes. Because of the weather, I was unable to attend.
Mr. President, I'm assuming there'll be 3 abstain, is that correct? Okay, so we're still okay as
Yeah,
far as.
absolutely.
Actually, we can remove
Oh,
Maureen
I'm
from
sorry.
that list.
So I amend the motion to remove Maureen from that list.
Second.
So there's a motion to amend by Rachel and seconded by Lisa to amend by
Patsy.
striking, Patsy, but to strike Maureen. So, John, I encourage you to ask if there's any discussion on the amendment
Is there
to
any-
strike Maureen.
Is there any discussion on that amendment? Seeing and hearing none, Denise, please call roll.
And you're voting on the amendment to strike
That's
Maureen.
correct.
Trying to find the option to do this. Called paper and pen. There you go. Yeah.
I still think it's shorter than
Or someday.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, so this will just be Robin and.
The first one is the amendment to the motion.
Okay. Nichols?
Abstain.
She can abstain. Stevens?
Yes, I think.
Yes.
Neary?
Oh, do I, no, I don't abstain this one yet, do I?
No.
Okay, all right.
You don't have to abstain.
Neary? Neary?
Yes.
Fricky?
Yes.
Wise?
Yes.
Co-Johns?
Yes.
Tim?
Yes.
Witzel?
Yes.
7 yes, 1 abstain.
So, Mr. President, the main motion reads to approve expenses for Robin and Lisa for the NASB Legislative Conference on January 28th.
I'll make the motion.
So there's a motion on the floor
Oh,
for that.
that's right. I'm
So if
sorry.
there's no further discussion, then you could vote.
Denise, roll call, please.
Okay. Nichols?
Yes.
Stevens?
Abstain.
Neary?
Yes.
Fricky?
Abstain.
Wise?
Yes.
Co-Johns?
Yes.
Tim?
Yes.
Witzel?
Yes.
6 yes, 2 abstain.
It's really a game to see if you're paying attention. Again, we're working on making that more streamlined for you. I want you to remember that we're popping popcorn out there and Jason's getting that started. I bet you're hungry, so might move
We'll
to
move on,
10.3.
we're going on to future meeting participation. Is there a motion to approve the future meeting participation?
So moved.
Second.
Patsy and Rachel, any discussion? Seeing and hearing none, Denise, please call roll.
I'm there. Nichols?
You can vote for future meeting
Yeah.
participation, it's
Yeah.
just the one in the past.
Yes.
Yes.
Stevens?
Yes.
Neary?
Yes.
Fricky?
Yes.
Wise?
Yes.
Co-Johns?
Yes.
Tim?
Yes.
Witzel?
Yes. Thank you very much, Denise. The monthly board travel expense report is attached in the Spark meetings for your review. The next items are for information items and written reports for board and for our information only. Adjournment. Thank you for those who tuned in to the broadcast. A work session will be held on Thursday, March 7th at 2 p.m. and a board meeting will be held on Friday, March the 8th at 9 a.m. in this room. The February State Board work session and meeting are adjourned. Thank you. Thank you.
We'll name this Denise Appreciation Day.
Yeah.